started. Good morning. My name is Alan Wernick. I'm the director of CUNY Citizenship Now. Very pleased to welcome you to the training for our 12th annual Daily News CUNY call-in, which you know is going to be on April 28th through May 2nd. This year we expect to have more than 400 people working the phones, more than 400 people. Of course, we'll be answering thousands of calls as we have in the past. As always, we'll have a large turnout of elected officials. Some are still calling in, but I can assure you, no matter which day you come, you're going to meet somebody who is a servant of the populace of New York City, an elected servant of the populace of New York City. I want to mention something new this year. For the first time, we're partnering with NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. And they have offices around, they have phone banks around the country, and their phone bank in Los Angeles is going to pick up overflow calls from the operation in New York. And we're very pleased to have Tamara Bloom, who many of you know. Unfortunately, we're going to have to send her to Los Angeles. She'll be working with Rosie Eugenio, who's another attorney with us, to help work with the NALEO effort. So I thought you might find that interesting. Now, as you know, our goal at the call-in is to provide information to immigrants to help them on the path to citizenship. And with immigration reform stalled in Congress, we know that this is information that we're providing is more important than ever, because now the hopes of many people that they would be able to get their status through some form of immigration reform is now pretty much, those hopes are dashed. I mean, you hear every once in a while people talking about it, but my own perspective is we're not going to see that happen for a number of years. Also, I want to mention that we expect, because of the increased visibility of the daily news on the internet, we expect a larger number of calls from outside of the New York City. And during the training session today, we'll be talking about how to address those concerns, and particularly, I mean, the law is not going to be any different anywhere, but in terms of referring people to get legal assistance, if they're outside of New York, obviously we're not going to be able to refer them to New York offices. Now, we have a short but important program for you this morning. You know, when I look out at from the very first call-in up and through today, and I see the contribution that our call-in volunteers make, and I go to our community events, and I see how many of you dedicate your Saturdays to helping people with their citizenship, it inspires me, and it reminds me what a great city New York City is, and a great spirit of community that we have in New York City. And there's nobody that I know who embodies that spirit more than the Senior Vice Chancellor for University Relations and Secretary of the Board of Trustees at CUNY, Jay Hershenson. When Vice Chancellor Hershenson envisioned the call-in and had the vision to get this project going, and of course had the smarts to call me to help him. That's a joke. You're supposed to, okay, let's say that. Let's try that again. And of course he had the smarts to call me to help him. Very good. He made it happen, and he makes not just this event happen, but Citizenship Now happen. It's his vision, his political support, and I should say also his financial support that ensures that every day CUNY Citizenship Now is out there helping the people of New York, the immigrants of New York, on their path to citizenship. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce my boss, Senior Vice Chancellor Jay Hershenson.
I wish my mother and father could have been here to hear that introduction. My mother would have loved it, but my father wouldn't have believed it. Boy, if someone would have said to me, you know, it'll be a cold day in the spring, before you have a dozen call-ins, right? Would anybody have believed that? 12 call-ins. This is number 12. What is it, Alan? 120,000 people? More than 123,000 people served, which means more than 123,000 families. I mean, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers and beyond, because anyone who reads the Daily News knows that the readership is national as well as in New York and in the region. That deserves a tremendous round of applause. We should be incredibly proud how many people we've helped. You know, and you tend to get credit for something when it goes right, and then people kind of run away if it goes wrong. So I'm going to take a step back and say two things with respect to credit. The first is everyone here in the room knows that Professor Alan Wernick, Director Alan Wernick, Attorney Alan Wernick, activist, advocate Alan Wernick, from the very, very outset, he ensured that Citizenship Now would be of the highest quality possible. And that, it seems to me, is what has been so crucial to the brand, because he has reached out to all of you with his great staff and his great colleagues, and let Alan Wernick hear our appreciation. And from the outset, we would have had a very small program. And I mean it. You know, all across this country, there are great, great programs and services of all kinds. The fact that the Daily News, which had experience with call-ins, which had experience communicating information, stood with us from the very beginning as our partner, and in all the planning, in all the implementation, in all the development that has occurred, to really have such a great, great newspaper in our corner from the outset, and to have the editor-in-chief here, who you will be hearing from, Colin Myler, who will, of course, again, indicate his tremendous support. I think that that deserves our appreciation in the biggest of ways. I do want to thank Gutman Community College, because they're hosting us again. I want to thank John Jay College for hosting us today. I do want to point out that I guess when we first started, we couldn't put on the screen all of the various partners. Are we able to do that? Are we able to show that on the screen? In fact, on the back of the program, you'll see the list of partners that... There we go. I mean, just look at this. Here we are. We're in call-in number 12. We have sponsors and partners in the corporate sector, in the not-for-profit sector. The Legal Aid Society has been with us from the beginning. The fact that Citizenship Now is perceived clearly, widely, in a tremendously prominent way is a testament to the work of everyone here. Now, somewhere in the room, there must be a few people who were with us at the first call-in. Can anyone who was at the first call-in who served as a volunteer please stand up? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wow. Beautiful. Thank you. And of course, the success of the Daily News CUNY call-in, Citizenship Now, has to do with the fact that now the room is full of lots of new people, some of whom have never been here before, who are at their first training session, who are getting their first exposure to this incredible service. I want to tell you a little story, which I normally don't do as part of my introductory remarks. I guess a little less than 2 weeks ago, I was at LaGuardia Community College on a Saturday. We were doing a CUNY fair, and we try to do this on a regular basis, both through Citizenship Now and through CUNY in terms of providing information about how to apply to college. And we try to partner with different groups, different organizations all across the city. We do it all year round. In this particular CUNY fair, we were doing in partnership with the Colombian Consulate. And we got involved with the Colombian Consulate because the Mexican Consulate has a great program with us, and they told our friends at the Colombian Consulate, what a great place CUNY is to work with. And so, so we had a program. And I met a student at the program. Her name is Angelica Martinez. She's here today. I encouraged her to join us. And she told her story at this fair. She arrived here from Bogota, Colombia, with her parents. And she was on a visitor's visa. So she came here at the age of 13 and began to go through the system, through the public school system, including the opportunity to attend LaGuardia Community College's language skills program. You know, people sometimes don't realize that our community colleges do a tremendous amount of work with communities, including helping new immigrants gain access to language skills. So later on, they can go to college. And she found her way to Long Island City High School, where she did terrific. But when it came time for her to apply to college, her high school advisor asked about her Social Security number, and she didn't have one. And her high school advisor indicated to her, as she has said, that she could not apply to college, which is quite a message to give a young student who was doing well in high school. Of course, she went home and talked this over with her parents, tried to figure out what the options might be, whether or not to go back to Columbia, or whether or not to try to just figure something out and put her college aspirations on the shelf. Instead, she went to Baruch College to talk to people there, and she brought the application with her. Well, when she came to Baruch, the people at Baruch said, "We'd love to have you. You have a great academic record. I think people in the room here know that Baruch is not an easy place to get into. It has very high standards," and they accepted her. And she went through Baruch, and she, at the same time, enrolled at Ostos Community College and got a certificate in not-for-profit management. She wanted to be a stockbroker and work with various community organizations as well. She was very, very ambitious. And she graduated from Baruch and then enrolled in Baruch's School of Public Affairs, where she is graduating this May. She's working as an intern in the office of Linda Rosenthal, the Assemblywoman who happens to represent much of the area around John Jay College. And of course, what I'm describing is very much the CUNY story, right? You know, someone who is an immigrant, just as many of us were either immigrants or the sons and daughters of immigrants. I mean, that very much is the CUNY story. And every step of the way, whether it was through LaGuardia or through Baruch or through Ostos Community College, she encountered a real sense of welcome from CUNY. However, she still had to deal with her immigration situation. I mean, that obviously came up. And I've asked her to come here today and just talk about, for a moment or two, how she figured out the place to get help in this city to help her begin to resolve her immigration issues. So please welcome Angelica Martinez.
Wow, thank you so much. That was such a great introduction. Well, so you already know part of my story. What I want to talk to you about now is how CUNY Citizenship Now helped my family and I. So when you're a new immigrant, you're trying to figure this whole legal situation. In the countries where we come from, or at least where I come from, there aren't that many immigrants. So this whole thing with having a social security number or a green card, being on a work visa, like all those things don't ever come up, and it's something that's kind of difficult to understand when you're new and you feel like, well, I came here and this country should just welcome me and it should be easy and it shouldn't be so much of a struggle. But for us it was, and then my grandfather, my mother's father, was a U.S. citizen, so he said, hey, I can just request my family, it should be easy. We went, filled out the application, did it, and then they turned around and told us, well, it's going to take like about 12 years. You should come back then, and we'll go through it. So that was hard, and throughout the whole time, the whole waiting period, well, we couldn't have jobs with a W-2 with like a normal pay, so it was hard to gather the money to afford an attorney. So when the time came around, one of my mother's friends had actually read about CUNY Citizenship Now in the Daily News and told my mother, hey, there's this program run by CUNY. And my mother said, oh, of course, CUNY. Yeah, my daughter goes there. So they have legal help. Maybe you can get some assistance with your application. And so my mother called, made an appointment, went there, and got all the help that she needed. And we had a wonderful attorney who's here today, Andres Lemos. And not only did he speak our language, but he was very thorough with everything and assisted my family through the process. Now, of course, because the immigration system is so weird and complicated, turned out that I was not part of my family anymore when the process came around, because I was over the age of 21, so I wasn't part of that. However, later on, when President Obama approved the Deferred Action Program, Andres came to the rescue again and helped me fill out my Deferred Action application. And right now, I have a work permit and a social security number that I can move forward with. Yeah, and in the end, all of this was really thanks to CUNY. I don't know what would have happened with our application if we didn't have the right help and the right resources. We certainly didn't know what we were doing or how to fill out the forms, what to do, what to send. And with the complexity of the immigration system, if you send something wrong with the wrong form, you can easily get denied. And this is all because of lack of knowledge. So what you guys are doing here today, it's pretty wonderful, and many, many people will be helped, and thank you for that.
Thank you. You know, it took a lot of courage for Angelica to come here this morning, being encouraged by us, and she's graduating in May, which is absolutely phenomenal. Hopefully, she'll still talk to us later on when she becomes a celebrity and is giving autographs. But the clarion call is clear. The message to every Angelica, every Angel, every Alyssa, every Adrian, that the Daily News and CUNY are here to help you. Call during Citizenship Now's call-in, and thank you all for your great help.
All right, thank you very much, Vice Chancellor. As you know, I write a column for the Daily News, appears twice a week, and you know I've been doing it for 20 years. Actually, this is my 20th year writing for the paper. And, oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm very grateful to the Daily News because it's given me the opportunity to write about our complicated immigration system, and I can't tell you how many people I meet who come up to me and say, you know, I read your column and it really helped me, it changed my life. And it's also allowed me to weigh in on some of the, you know, great immigration debates of our time, like talking about the DREAM Act, about immigration reform. And I'm very proud to be associated with the news because I think no other paper covers the immigration beat, covers the immigration story, covers the lives of immigrants like the Daily News. We have reporter Erica Pearson, who's here with us today, columnist Albor Ruiz, who you know add to this mix. There's if you read the editorial page, you'll see a very strong pro-immigrant message that comes out of that page. And the news, as you know, as you've heard already, and we'll hear more about, is a terrific partner with CUNY Citizenship Now. Of course, no way we could have done what we're doing here for the 12th time without the partnership of the Daily News. So it's a great pleasure for me to call our next speaker to the podium, the CEO of the Daily News, Bill Hollenberg.
Good morning, everybody. Is this the first time for most people? Yeah, I see a few heads going up and down, and I recognize a few faces, but from the past few years. We have an incredible partnership with CUNY. and what we've been able to do in the immigrant community is quite incredible, especially with this phone program. You know, the Daily News is committed to covering immigrants. We write about it every day in the paper, on the website, and not just here in New York, but also from people around the country. You'll probably get calls from people around the country during the week because of everything on our website. So it's a great service that we do. It's the 12th time we've been doing this. We've, to date, have helped over 123,000 people over those years. Incredible stories. I think you just heard one just a few minutes ago. And it is the most extensive university immigration law service program in the United States. There's nothing like it anywhere. So I think So last year, 380 volunteer attorneys and counselors, all organized by CUNY. It's an incredible effort. Staffed the phones, answered questions about citizenship and other aspects of U.S. immigration law and procedures. We assisted, altogether, you know, the callers, about over 13,000 people last year, 48 different languages. So it's pretty incredible. I know there'll be a list somewhere that'll have all the different languages, and someone will call and have to run around for that one person that knows that one language to help the person on the phone. And so it's a pretty incredible effort. We're very fortunate to have great media partners that do this with us. Univision 41 here in the city, WABC TV, great partners, have really elevated the program we're doing, great communication effort here in the city. Our tech sponsors, Cisco and Presidio, the phones, that's the lifeline for a lot of people, and they're the ones that really take care of that, and many other people. We have the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Legal Aid Society, the National Association of Latino elected and appointed officials, the New York State Office of New Americans, the New York City's Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, the International Rescue Committee, and New Americans Campaign, and of course, CUNY Law School. Without them, a lot of unanswered questions would be going on. And obviously, all of you, the volunteers, that really make that effort. And it feels great when you're out there helping people really make it here in the United States. It's a very, very exciting opportunity for so many people. Of course, Gristedes, the Stella and Charles Gutman Community College, and John Jay, where we are here, our sponsors. So it's a week-long event, hotline event. Get your energy up. I know there's a lot of good food that's going to be served. Starts Monday, April 28th through Friday, May 2nd. So a couple weeks from now or so. The newly named, it's going to be at the newly named Stella and Charles Gutman Community College on 50 West 40th Street. So it's a good place to be. And I think that's about it. I think you're going to, for people who haven't done it before, it's going to be an enlightening experience. For the people who have done it before, you know why you're here. The energy and the help that you're going to give thousands of immigrants is a real fulfilling opportunity. But thank you very much.
Okay, our next speaker is an immigrant himself, so he appreciates what we're doing here probably more than most of the people you're going to hear from. Now, this is the first time ever, and I'll introduce you later, but it's the first time ever I've had help writing this speech and my presentation today. And the speechwriter has a line here which I'm going to read, and it said about our next speaker that he is partial to rugby over football. He's a great friend of CUNY Citizenship Now, and under his stewardship, the Daily News has become a leading online presence in the country. He is not new to our call-in, but he's relatively new. He certainly wasn't here when we started. but he's been a great and grand supporter. So it's my pleasure to introduce Editor-in-Chief Colin Myler.
Good morning. Thanks, Alan. I'll ask a question. Hands up, anybody knows what rugby is? Like it, very good. This side of the room. I'm going to address you. First of all, it's a great pleasure and an honor to be here today. They're words that can flow out of anybody's mouth that come up to a podium and say, well, that's what you would say. Alan mentioned Jay's smarts about coming up with this idea, which would have been 13 years ago, I think, Jay. I'm delighted that he had the smarts to come to the Daily News with the idea. I'm delighted that the Daily News has so steadfastly supported what is, as you've heard, become the biggest university-led program that gives advice that's free every year. It is an astonishing achievement, but it's not about really the Daily News, in truth. We are lucky that Jay came to us with the idea. We're lucky that we have someone like Alan, who is so smart and across this so important area of immigration advice and the challenges of reform, which, as he said, are incredibly disappointing by what's happened in Washington. But every time that you hear a story, like you've heard today with Angelica, it makes you realize that where the Daily News is important is that sending out those kind of simple messages can spread so far, so wide, and can lead to, even in moments of great despair where you don't think you're getting anywhere, you're not going anywhere, nobody's listening, no one's opening a door, no one's answering the phone, the Daily News can help. One of the things that is very challenging for us as an industry, which I know you all know, is that, you know, newspapers are a great medium, but they're a medium of, let's put it this way, a certain generation, a certain age. And there are those people who love to get their paper, read it with a coffee throughout the day. But the explosion of the digital media now means that, as far as the Daily News is concerned, probably this year more than any other, the message that will go out on the Daily News website will be to not just an audience that is servicing in New York, but national. To give you an idea of the scale, last March, last year, we had about 27 million unique visitors. March this year, it was over 50 million. So, as Alan said, you probably will get calls, hopefully, from people outside of the New York State area, which is a great thing. All I want to say is that this would not happen without you. Every single one of you gives up time, you're dedicated, you're really helping people who need help. We are honored to be a vehicle to help you. So all I will say is thanks to Jay, thanks to Alan, thanks to Cooney, a wonderful partnership, thanks to all the other partners and the media partners in particular. And we'll all be here when it starts on the 28th. And I'll tell you something else. The reaction, every year when we put the invitations out, they all go to Washington. We send them to literally everybody in Washington. And this year, the reaction has been very, very interesting. Normally, it's can't make it, not there, busy schedule, other things. This year, we've had responses from very senior figures in Washington who are saying they're going to come. Well, we'll see. I hope they do. They say they are. We'll give them a dig if they don't. But thank you. It is a pleasure for us to do what we do, and it wouldn't happen without every one of you. Thank you.
Okay, we're right on schedule. At this point in the program, I want to, you've heard a list of our co-sponsors, but I want to go through it again and just to remind us all how many different organizations and groups have partnered with us this year. Every year it expands. Every year some group approaches us saying they'd like to help. First, our media sponsors, Univision and ABC7. We have 2 sponsors that make those phones happen when you're at the call-in. All that equipment is not there now, but it will be there when you get there. And they send people to stay with us to make sure that those phones continue to work, and that's Cisco and Presidio. Gristedes, as a contributor, has been for a number of years, the grocery chain. Gutman Community College, you know, is we're going to be having our event. CUNY's newest college. The John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which is where we are today, and they've been a very good friend of ours, and we're very pleased to be here and hope to be here again for many other events. The Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, the Commissioner was not able to make it today, but she does send her regards. The American Immigration Lawyers Association, which sends a lot of some of the most experienced immigration lawyers in the city who will be attending the call-in and assisting us. The Legal Aid Society, which again it provides a tremendous level of expertise, some of the best immigration lawyers in the country, in my humble opinion. For the first time this year, the International Rescue Committee. As always, the CUNY School of Law. For the first time, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, NALEO, which I mentioned earlier. Again, their call bank in California and Los Angeles. Unfortunately, I can't go because I have to be with you in New York. That's my home country where I go surfing every summer. But unfortunately, I have to stay with you, although I'm very pleased to be doing that. I didn't mean it that way. It didn't come out that way. The New Americans campaign, which is a collaboration, a national collaboration of organizations that are helping people become U.S. citizens, and the New York State Office of New Americans, which operates out of the New York State Department of State. So we're very pleased to have these sponsors. Now, the next part of the program, we're going to show you a short video which was created for a fundraiser that we held last month. Some of you were there, many of you were not able to make it. And it shows some of the work of CUNY Citizenship Now in action, both in our community outreach events, and you'll also see some footage from the call-in you may see yourself on screen. David?
She, of course, is the daughter of immigrants, you know, Shirley Chisholm from Brooklyn College, right? Brooklyn College alum.
It's no surprise that the photos on the walls of Jay Hershensen's office each have a connection to CUNY, but each image also has a connection to the civil rights movement. During his own college years, Hershensen was passionate about voter registration at CUNY's Queens College. As senior vice chancellor, he instituted a CUNY-wide voter registration program. However, many in the CUNY community were unable to vote because they were not U.S. citizens.
What do you do when someone says to you, I can't fill out the form because I'm not a citizen? Do you simply say, well, thanks very much, goodbye? Or could you possibly say, there might be a way to help you? We talked about this sense of frustration and decided that we had to come up with a way to not only register students to vote, but also to make sure that they would get some access to help with respect to their immigration status.
In order to get the program off the ground, Hershensen needed to find someone to handle day-to-day operations. That person was Alan Wernick.
Alan is a superstar. He's a Marvel superhero, a champion, a crusader.
Alan Wernick has been helping immigrants become U.S. citizens since he was a student at Loyola Law School. He serves as the director of Citizenship Now and is one of the program's founders.
We have the largest, by far, immigration law service program of any college or university in the country. by helping people along the path to U.S. citizenship, we both strengthen CUNY but also strengthen the city of New York.
Citizenship Now began in 1997 for members of the CUNY community, but has since expanded to serve all New York City residents. The program does community outreach twice a month and operates 6 full-time centers across New York City where program participants can get help with immigration issues, take English classes, and classes in U.S. history.
We have 6 centers. When I say full-time centers, that means there's at least 1 attorney, 1 paralegal, and 1 community assistant. We also have interns from the CUNY Service Corps participating in our project.
Since 2004, Citizenship Now has been teaming up with the Daily News to host a call-in where New York City residents could have their immigration questions answered. The enthusiasm has been growing year after year.
There was a lot of question in the beginning, I think, about whether people would call in, and the very first day, so many people called in that the Daily News phone system broke down. Now we have 48 phone lines, 24 in English, 24 in Spanish, actually, and then 1 TTS line.
But nothing received the level of response, the high level of response, more so than the Citizenship Now call-in. And what better place to do a call-in than New York City, the home of Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty and so many immigrant groups that have found the American dream.
The immigrant community needs to be protected, and they need to know how to get citizenship and how to avoid, from my perspective as the DA, how to avoid people taking advantage of them, promising them, we'll get you a green card or we'll get you documentation if you pay us money, and then it's not delivered. So I applaud CUNY for its outreach to let the immigrant population know how to get documentation, how to get on the road to citizenship.
Citizenship Now has found itself a major voice in the national debate surrounding immigration.
You want to see New York in our future, just look at all those people there. Every different background, every different probably borough and community and neighborhood. And I really want to salute both City University and the Daily News for taking such strong leadership on this issue. I am certain that more than a few of the 100,000 people that City University and the Daily News have helped, their kids will be on the list of the Forbes 400. Their kids will win Nobel and Pulitzer Prizes. Their kids will be great humanitarians and great leaders and great political leaders as well.
More than 97,000 New Yorkers navigating the complex road to citizenship have benefited from the work they are doing here today. I want to thank CUNY and the Daily News for launching this effort and providing such leadership and vision for our city about what it takes to make a difference in this community.
The heroes, without question, are the volunteers. They were the ones who provided 9 to 7 p.m. hours. Sometimes people would call up and ask to speak directly to one of the volunteers because they related to that particular person. Can I talk to Edna? Then we had to go find Edna.
Citizenship Now counts 2,000 volunteers among its ranks, venturing out into communities across the 5 boroughs. We saw them at Hostos Community College in the Bronx, helping a number of permanent residents become U.S. citizens.
This is our signature activity, which is a mass application assistance program where we utilize volunteers, staff attorneys. So when they leave here, they should be able to go to the post office, include their check or their fee waiver application, and send it in. They're ready to go.
Wernick also writes a column twice weekly for the Daily News. He says it provides a crucial platform for his work with Citizenship Now, reminding hopeful immigrants that there's free help on the road to becoming a U.S. citizen.
Any person who qualifies to become a permanent resident can come to Citizenship Now, and we will find a way to help them become a U.S. citizen.
This is David, by the way, who's helping me with this technology so I can concentrate on my presentation. Next, we have a very special guest, and to introduce that guest is a staff person, many of you know, From CUNY Citizenship Now, Sofia Carreño. She's our Communications and College Relations Specialist, and she will introduce our next speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Well, by now it is a tradition that we find someone that you have helped through the calling to come and share his or her experience and her immigration story with us. So this year, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Carolina Solano. Carolina is originally from Honduras. She came to the United States 20 years ago to join her husband, who was living here. Brought up by a mother who was very interested in politics and who held office as the mayor of her town, Carolina has always believed in democratic participation as a means to make a change in society. Carolina is active in her community, volunteering with various organizations, and is currently working as a paramedic. Now a U.S. citizen, Carolina is an example of how our volunteers positively affect the lives of immigrants, not only at our calling, but also at our weekend events, and many of you are volunteers at our weekend events. So let us hear from Carolina now.
Good morning to everybody. I am Carolina Solano. I have wanted to become USA citizen since 2012 because I wanted to vote. I believe people of color and Latino should have the opportunity to get a legal status in the United States. But as I see that Washington has not able to compromise to help them to find the path to become legal. For that reason, I wanted to vote to select public officials who are willing to help my community. I first tried to become USA citizen since 2012. I learned about the service CUNY Citizenship Now offer when I was in Univision. Through the phone line, I referred to the event. I went to the event, I filled out all the application, but at the end, I didn't send my application because I didn't have the money. Time passed. I was watching Univision again last year. I saw the information about the phone lines. I decided I could not wait anymore to become citizen. I called the line. Immediately, I referred to the event here at John Jay College. Where I was helped, at this time, I sent my application right away. A month ago, I got my citizenship. Immediately after I left, the oath ceremony, I went to the post office to send my application to register to vote. Now I'm already registered. I'm waiting for the next election. I know you are the volunteer of Citizenship Now. You are here to give you time and knowledge to help others. I want to thank everybody for the support I received from them for this opportunity to achieve my dream. Thank you very much.
Okay, before we get to the main, oh, I'm sorry. Oh. Thank you. I got so nervous. Carolina, if you could please. Thank you. And thank you, Monique. It's not easy being green. You got that, right? Some of you got that. Very good, very good. You can ask me later if you didn't get it. Before we continue, we're very close to beginning the educational part of the program. Before we do that, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge some of the key members of CUNY Citizenship Now who have helped. We're going to have later, if you stay for the reception, we're going to have a more detailed and expansive thank you to our staff. But I want to thank some of the key people. Jim McGovern, our Deputy Director, if you could stand. So, Sofia Carreño, our Communications Coordinator you just heard from. Monique Francis, who she makes sure that we don't overspend the university's money. Tom Shea, our Senior Attorney. Tom. Tamara Bloom, who is going to Tamara has coordinated the presentations today, and as I said, unfortunately, she will not be with us at the call-in, so if you want to talk to her, now's the time. Kim Gashi, who coordinated this whole event. And I want to say that I thought the food was exceptional this morning. And Stina Rosenquist, our volunteer coordinator. Stina, is she here? She's out keeping busy, but when she started just a year ago before our call-in, and she was just sort of a helper around. But this year, she's really coordinated the volunteers. Many of you know her, and if you don't, you should get to know her later. Another hand for Stina. Now, what we have here are the staff of CUNY Citizenship Now. You see our central office, that's where you see my handsome face. Our various centers, City College, CUNY Express, Flushing, Ostos Community College, Medgar. We have a special program with the Office of New Americans, our York College Center. We have a group of city council member, staff attorneys, pardon me. We have a group of attorneys who go to our city council offices throughout New York City and provide services right on site, and our special project staff. So let's give them all a great hand. Woo! Okay, so we have a great program. I'm going to call up to the podium our program coordinator, who I've mentioned, our program chair, which is Tamara Bloom. I'll remind you we have an opening reception immediately after the training. So if you have to leave, please come back for there. I will be there. I look forward to speaking to as many of you as possible. So Tamara, if you could please come up and begin the program.
Good morning again, everyone. Thank you for being here. This is a much more intimate room than we've had in the past, which I kind of like. We get to see everybody's faces. We're much closer together. I don't have to worry about falling when I come up on the stage. Last year, no one wanted to hang out with me because I was 9 months pregnant, so hopefully this year, everybody thought they may have to deliver a baby in an emergency situation, but hopefully today goes smoothly, no babies will be delivered, and we'll be enjoying the more substantive legal portion of the training. We have some wonderful speakers and some moderators and also some panelists in the afternoon who are going to help guide you through the information that you're going to need to be able to connect the callers that you'll be helping with reliable, authorized, free and low-cost immigration services. I'd like everybody to just glance at their folder that they were provided. I just want to make sure everyone knows what's inside. You'll find a full list of the biographies of the presenters that you'll hear from today, a program, and some handouts that will be referred to by the presenters throughout the day. And also, most importantly, you're going to find a copy of this year's version of the call-in training manual. Which everyone, will get to know and love, hopefully, by the end of today and also during the week of the call-in. So we hope to provide you with some of the policies and procedures that you'll need to direct callers to helpful referrals. We hope to give you an overview of some, of the key pieces of immigration law to help you, and we're going to move the program towards our presentation on naturalization and citizenship for children, which happens to be an area where callers have the most questions. So I'm going to introduce you now to our morning moderator, Hamel Vallas, who is the Director of International Personnel for Mount Sinai Medical Center. Enjoy the program, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Tamara. For the folks in the audience, please hold your questions for the presenters until the Q&A session following the presentations. If you have questions for the presenters during the Q&A session, please write them on the index cards that were given to you and pass them to our staff to collect. For the folks watching at home, you can send us your questions using the chat box on the right side of your screen. All viewers here and at home can send their questions to our Facebook page at Citizenship Now or via Twitter at CUNY Citizenship using hashtag #CitizenshipNow, or you can email questions for the presenters at cunycitizenshipnow@gmail.com. Turn on your iClicker by pulling the tag on the back and pushing the bottom button. We will use these throughout the presentations. Please do not leave today without returning the iClicker back to us. Staff members will be stationed at the door to collect the iClickers. Thank you.
Okay. Thought you had enough of me, huh? So they asked me to do the introductory presentation today because about the actual operation of the call-in, because they said since I'm the big boss, you'll have to listen to me. And there's some lessons that we want you to learn, and it's very important that you learn them. So my talk this morning, and I'll be speaking also later this afternoon, is on call-in tips and procedures. And is David here to move the slides? I should do it myself. Huh? I can do it. I'm a big boy. Call-in tips and procedures. I'm pretty hip to the modern whatever. I'm on Twitter, by the way. Those of you, and CUNY Citizenship Now has its own Twitter, but you can follow me at @Wernick, okay? And I send out some stuff that you might be interested in. So I'm going to talk about some tips and procedures for the call-in itself. So we're the same location as last year. Those of you who are there, very convenient. If it's a nice day and you have time and you're in the mood after you leave the call and you have a beer in the park there, it's terrific. It's going to be May 28th. We do, as usual, we need help, especially on the Spanish lines in the 4 to 7 slot. So if you have the opportunity and you speak Spanish, we'd love to have you join us a little bit extra time or change to that slot. Tonight is the last time to submit your bio and photo. They're going to be produced online, and we're going to market the link. It won't be in the paper this year, but you're still going to get a lot of play. So the purpose of the call-in, as you know, is to provide free information referrals. We want to connect people with reliable immigration service providers. Most of the people that you talk to are not going to be able to go out and do what they need to do based on the information you provide them. They're going to need help. And considering there are so many free and low-cost services in New York City, we want to make sure that you send them to get that help. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is how to get the information you need to figure out what kind of help they need and to make that referral. Now, New York State law prohibits non-lawyers from providing legal advice. So what we say is we give people information. And the way I like to explain as quickly as I can the distinction between information and advice is when the person says, well, should I file my application? And you say yes or no. That's advice. If the person says, am I qualified to file my application? You say, well, the rules are, and you explain what the rules are. So that's just a simple way of thinking about it. The information is confidential and anonymous. We do not ask people their name, and we don't give their name, but we don't ask people the kind of personal information that will reveal who they are. The most important thing about your responsibility is that we want to provide high-quality information, correct and accurate information. At the call-in, sometimes you'll see people trying to, everybody's excited about the numbers. We reached 10,000, we reached this number, we reached that number. That's great. We want to help a lot of people. But it's more important that the people get good information. So if you need to take your time, take your time. Do not rush. There are going to be plenty of lawyers and accredited representatives available. You hold up a stop sign, and you'll learn more about that later, and somebody will come and talk to you. Also, look through the booklet. One time somebody came up to me and says, this fellow here, he's spending all his time looking at the booklet. I said, well, that's what I want him to do. I want people, first of all, that's how you give good information. And second of all, part of what we're trying to do is to teach you immigration law so that you are stronger members of your community. So it's not just about the information you provide, but it's also what you learn and what you get out of the experience. And the only way you're going to get experience is by being thorough, looking at the book, looking at the resources, raising your hand if you need help. And of course, as you heard this morning, but as you know from those of you who've been to the call-in, we make a tremendous impact on the lives of Americans. So let's take a look of our immigrants that are calling us. We provide information referrals. We provide referrals to agencies that can help people. Now, in your book, everybody look at their book. Just want to make sure you know what I'm talking about. There you go. There, in the description of the organizations, it says what kinds of services they provide. If somebody says, we don't do deportation defense, you don't send somebody who has a problem with deportation issue to that agency. Oh, thank you. I meant to bring it up. That Monique, she's always very handy. You have a list under 11, you have referral lists. And we want to make sure, again, because some of the agencies actually have complained to us that we're sending people that they can't help. So take a look at the list. One of the important things you should do before the call, and you have a week and a half to do your homework. We do not refer to private lawyers. However, if a person wants a private lawyer, we're happy to help them find one, somebody that is competent. So in your materials, you have the New York City Bar Association and AILA Lawyer Search Service contact information. If someone wants a private lawyer, that's who we refer them to. Of course, we don't provide legal advice, I always mentioned. You know, some people feel that because Citizenship Now is running this program that everybody should refer to Citizenship Now, be referred. We're not the only outstanding immigration law provider in New York City. There are many, and they are listed in your handbook. And you should send, because if you send everyone to CUNY Citizenship Now, they're going to have to wait a really long time to get help. So what you want to do is you want to try to send people, first of all, to someplace in their neighborhood, and secondly, to an agency that is competent to handle their kind of case. We do not send people, of course, to particular private attorneys or to for-profit organizations. That's really a no-no. We don't want people to be using this service to get business. Again, we don't have a problem with people going to private attorneys. If people can afford a private attorney, they should go to one, and they should go to a competent one, but you should use our referral list. So, just to go over some of the key guidelines, no private referrals. We have a zero-tolerance policy. We're going to boot your butt out of the place if we find out you're doing that. We do not take the names of callers, and we do not give out the names of volunteers. You shouldn't do that. You don't want to give out your name. You know, it's a way of protecting you more than anything else. We will have supervising attorneys, at least one or accredited representative for 1 of 4 to 6 callers. They will have a blue or red sash. The only distinction is the people with the red sash speak Spanish, but just because they speak Spanish doesn't mean they don't also speak English. So, if you're on the English side of the room, on an English phone call, don't feel bad about asking somebody who has a red sash. But the red sash means that these people have been selected by us because of their expertise to supervise and to answer your questions. You raise your stop sign, somebody will come. Do not be ashamed. You know, every year there's some question that I cannot answer, and I've been doing this a lot of years. We won't say how many, but I've been doing this a lot of years. It's because immigration law is one of the most complicated areas, if not the most complicated area of law in the United States. So you should not be ashamed if you don't know the answer. So, taking the call. In your materials, you will find a Getting Started handout. It's in English and in Spanish. And, and there you'll find a disclaimer. And a disclaimer just means when the person when you're speaking to the caller, it's a way of protecting yourself so they understand the limitations of what you're doing for them, so they don't think you're their lawyer. It protects you. Should somebody say, oh, they gave me bad advice and, you know, I got in trouble, it makes sure that the caller understands the limit of what we're providing them, and you should read it for every call. Once you do that, you say, how can I help you? Now, in my experience, I'm going to move to the next slide. These are some sample questions. Depending on how experienced you are, after X number of years doing this, I'm very comfortable saying, what's your problem? And I just ask people, and they talk about it, and in 2 or 3 minutes, I can sort of zone in on what other questions I need to ask. Some of you are going to have less experience in that. But remember, what we're trying to do is first see if you can answer the question yourself. That's always the goal. Try to answer it yourself using the materials. If you cannot, we want to make sure you get some information that will help you talk to the attorney or representative so that they can better and more quickly answer the caller's question. What kind of immigration benefit are you interested in? If the person is not lawfully here, a common question is, what was your first entry and how did you enter? What is your current immigration status? Make notes. Try and get as much information as possible before the supervising attorney. That does two things. It makes our service more efficient, right? Because then when you talk to the attorney, you get through the call more quickly. But it also teaches you more, because the more information you get, the better your dialogue is going to be with the supervising attorney, and the more empowered you are going to be as an immigrants' rights activist in your community. Sections 1 and 2 of your handbook, naturalization and citizenship for children. Half of the questions we get are about citizenship for children. So if you have to fall asleep during the lectures today, don't fall asleep during the naturalization and citizenship for children. If you can only read 2 chapters between now and 10 days from now, read the chapters on naturalization and citizenship for children. Half of your calls will be about those 2 topics. There is no reason why the people in this room cannot answer almost every question that they get about these 2 topics. There'll be some questions you can't answer. There's some questions I can't answer. But most of the questions you will be able to answer if you read these 2 sections. When people are calling about citizenship, when people have been calling about these for advice, some of the questions, again, some additional questions you may want to consider: have you ever been ordered, deported, or removed? Removed is a technical term now. Most people still say deported. Have you ever been arrested? Do you have any family members who have immigration status? Because the most common way, as you will learn later, that people get green cards is through family immigration. If you have any questions whatsoever, any doubts, you make sure you get a supervisor to help. And here you see Midori, who stood up earlier. Is she here still? There, stand up again. Midori was our very first call-in. I just want to say, she was and is an attorney. She took a day off. Her employer would not let her, even though she worked for a nonprofit, her employer would not let her come to the volunteer at the call-in, so she took a vacation day. That was impressive. So I remembered her, and now she's one of our senior attorneys. So anyways, you see her giving advice to one of the call answerers. And again, use your call-in training manual to explain the criteria. Find the answer to the question if you can't, and if you have to, just read it. The stop sign. It's great. I got to give Naleo credit for this, because I was at a Naleo event in California where I was helping as a volunteer, and they held up a red piece of paper. See, we advanced it. We have stop signs. I'd say that's our contribution. Now I assume Naleo is going to pick up and then use stop signs. But I want to give Naleo and Julissa, if you want to stand up so people know. Julissa's she heads up the Naleo operation in New York. But when I was in California, I saw that they did this. You know, they held up these red pieces of paper when they needed help. I thought it was a very clever because sometimes people before they raise their hand and, you know, are you waving at a friend? Are you saying you need to go to the restroom? You know, why are you raising your hand? But if you have the stop sign, people know that means that you have stopped your work, you've put the person on hold, and then an attorney or credit representative is going to come and help you. Of course, you have the training manual. You should have in your packet frequently asked questions. Referrals. The list is in section 11. We do not take names or phone numbers. We do not take names or phone numbers. You refer people. You can refer to your agency. Many of you work for not-for-profits. Feel free to refer people to your agency, but do not give out your name or your phone number. Give out the agency's name and the agency's phone number. And that way, it's a way for anyone who's supervising to ensure that individuals, because we've had problems in the past with people trying to get business for themselves, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen. Again, do not give callers your name or number. I told you about private attorney, city bar referral panel, and the ALA Elite Lawyer Search Service. Again, try to, when you do the referral, which is a big part of what you're going to be doing, look through the list and try and refer somebody to a place where they're actually going to get help, because it's really unfortunate for the individual and for the agency when you send them somewhere where they don't do that kind of work. Like, for instance, for instance, CUNY, we at Citizenship Now, we do not do deportation defense. We can advise people about what their rights are, but we will not represent them typically in a removal deportation hearing. So why are you going to send somebody who's already in deportation proceedings? Send them to us. It's not going to be that helpful. Much better to send them to an agency that handles that kind of work. Try to, let's see where I am here. Good. We try our best to include up-to-date information, but remind the caller, if you're referring them to an agency, that they may have a waiting list at that agency, that they have particular intake procedures that we can't possibly explain to them over the phone. Their services may change. Some agencies charge a nominal fee. That's allowed under our regulations and rules. So how many slides away am I? 10 minutes. How many slides? A lot? Okay, I better get moving, because that 10 minutes doesn't help. You got to say how many slides. I'm just giving them a hard. They give me a hard time, I give a hard time back. Okay. All right. So reporting immigration scams. You have these phone numbers. People say they were ripped off. We never tell the person, oh yes, you know, your lawyer ripped you off. You should go to an agency. What you say, or the individual ripped you, because you don't really know that. You're just hearing what their side of the story is. But you can say, if you feel you've been ripped off, you go to one of these agencies. All right? Now, some of the information in the manual is not going to be covered today in our talk. And the reason we put it in the materials but don't cover it is because we get some questions about it and we'd like you to know it. And also, many people use this handbook as a reference. One lawyer told me that every attorney in his office has this on their desk. I certainly have it on mine. But also there are questions that come up, but they're not the most common questions. And the whole point of this exercise today is to get you ready to identify issues, to know most about the most common questions, be able to raise your hand and get help with others. But Freedom of Information Act requests, that means how do you get information about your immigration case? How do you get a new document if you've lost it or your document's expired? You know, in CUNY, if you graduate from a New York State high school and you attended for 2 years or meet other criteria, you can get in-state tuition. That's the same tuition paid by CUNY, New York City residents and citizens. There's information about how to deal with someone who's been arrested and detained and how to get them out. We have information about the forms, waiting times, the poverty guidelines, fee waivers. There's a ton of stuff in there, but you have to look through it. You have to thumb through it and get familiar with it. We have online, for those of you who are real studious and really want to be the best that you can be, as they say in Men in Black 1, the best of the best of the best. If you want to be the best of the best of the best, go to our website. We have various webinars and online trainings. We have a YouTube channel. And you can get, by the way, if you're a university, you can have stuff on YouTube that's longer than 10 minutes. So we have some pretty lengthy and substantive presentations there. You should go there and check it out. Okay, so that's the end of my talk. I will be, there'll be plenty of time for the way we're doing it. We're not having question and answers every speech, but we will have plenty of time for your questions. Please write them down so you don't forget. I will be here all day and at the reception. One reminder about the reception for those of you who are attending, and I hope you all do. I thought the food today was great this morning, the best we've ever had so far. And I expect the food at the reception to be the best we've ever had. In your program, there's a mistake. It says on the top, on the front page, the reception 5 to 7. That's true, but it's not clear. The food and booze will be available until 6 o'clock. The reception will then continue. But don't come to me at 5 after 6 and say, I didn't get that last glass of wine that I needed. I need one more glass. The wine will stop flowing at 6. So please, if you're planning to leave and come back, please be here at 5 o'clock so you get plenty to drink and eat. Thank you so much.
I don't know, it's really difficult to follow up Alan. I want to introduce our next speaker, Julie Jannerstein. She is a senior legal consultant with CUNY Citizenship Now. And Julie, you want to take?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So I am here to tell you the most important information you'll get all day, which is that you need to find your iClicker and turn it on. Because throughout the day, including during my talk, you're going to have the exciting opportunity to use your clicker and test your knowledge. So with that, find your clicker, turn it on, and we are going to get started. This is family-based immigration. So we're going to talk today about the role of the family in helping people who would like to move to the United States permanently do that legally. So people who are abroad who want to move here, or people who are already here, how they might get green cards based on family relationships. So basically, the family reason is the biggest reason why people get green cards every year. About 1 million people, a little over, depends on the year, a little bit more than 1 million these last few years, get green cards every year, green card being the popular term for lawful permanent residence. And the biggest reason that people are able to get green cards is because of a family relationship with a citizen or green card holder. Depending on the year, it's about 65 to 70% of the green cards we give go to family members. So it's a very important part of our immigration system. There are other reasons that people get green cards, but family is the most important one, the biggest one, the largest one. But even when people have close family members, a citizen's spouse, a green card holding parent, they're not necessarily going to be immediately eligible for a green card. or eligible at all. There are a lot of barriers, even when you may have a qualifying reason to apply for a green card. We won't have a chance to talk about all the reasons why people won't be eligible, but there are a bunch. Some really big ones that we see a lot include unlawful entry. That's like when you sneak across the border and no one's looking, or you present a document that says you have permission to come in, but it's not really a true document. That's a big one. Unlawful presence, that means you did have permission to come to the US, but then you were supposed to go and you didn't leave. Unlawful work, most adults work, and not all adults have permission to work, so sometimes when you're working without permission to work in the United States, that can create a problem. And then not surprisingly, criminal activities. Again, I can't stress enough how important it is that just because somebody says to you, my father's a US citizen, my husband's a US citizen, my 3 children are US citizens, can I apply for a green card? I don't have papers right now. The answer is not necessarily yes, and you really need to keep that in mind. Not everyone with a qualifying family relationship is also going to be eligible for a green card because of the barriers and others that I just spoke about. So the sponsorship, this is really a sometimes rule, and I say it so often because people can't believe that it's true. Some U.S. citizens and some lawful permanent residents, who are known also as LPRs or green card holders, can sponsor some close family members some of the time. Sometimes the family sponsorship and green card applications can be filed together, but in many, and really most cases, they can't be filed together. The family sponsorship part is filed first, and then, as you heard this morning with our speaker, it could be 10 years or more before the sponsored immigrant has the opportunity to apply for a green card. Sometimes people are eligible to apply for green cards. People who are in the United States can apply for green cards here in the United States. That is known as adjustment of status. And following me, you're going to have a whole talk on adjustment of status. But other times, people are not eligible to apply for green cards here, and if they're already in the US, they have to leave before they're able to process the green card application. So what's really sad is that many times you see people with a huge number of US citizen and green card holding family members, and they're not eligible. Again, reasons I've mentioned before: unlawful entry, unlawful work, unlawful presence, criminal activities. And then here is one where there's not been any violation of any law, simply lacking a financial sponsor, if you don't have family members or other people who can show that they can support you. So sometimes there are ways to get around the barriers. Sometimes there are waiver applications where you can say, yeah, I did this wrong, so sorry about it, but still give me a green card. So there are some cases like that. And then sometimes, as I mentioned, you're in the United States, you're not eligible to apply for a green card here, but you are eligible to leave and come back. Not all the time, though. So here we go. Here is your first poll question. Find your clicker, turn it on. Case study. Can Sandra get a green card? Sandra first came to the United States when she was 4 years old. After finishing college at the age of 23, Sandra married her long-term boyfriend and high school sweetheart, Brett. Soon, she became pregnant and gave birth to twins. Sarah's 2 daughters, her husband, Brett, and incidentally, her father, are all U.S. citizens. And this is based on a true story. So the question, can Sandra get a green card? I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. Oh, sorry. 30 seconds starts now. I have to hit the poll?
Start.
Ah,
Thank you. Start counting.
thank you.
See results right here. People are starting to go through, choosing the different responses. And then the ends, I can determine where you stop.
Yeah.
45 seconds or 30.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the poll, get your answer in. So let's see what the results are. We had one person who thought she can definitely get a green card because her father's a U.S. citizen, some who thought she could definitely get a green card because of her husband, some thought all of the family members together made a difference. And then the very end, the largest group says we don't yet know enough. Can I show the answer? Here we go, E. We don't know enough. So it is not automatic. She is not necessarily automatically a citizen because her father is. Sometimes when your parent becomes a citizen, you become a citizen at the same time. Sometimes that doesn't work out. Sometimes your family member can sponsor you, sometimes they can't. We really don't know enough. And so again, very important. Just because everyone in your family is a citizen doesn't tell you what you need to know to give somebody proper information about their case. So again, bottom line, no guarantees. Now I'm going to talk about the family relationships, and this is a really kind of confusing part, so make sure you note this, maybe put a check by it in your PowerPoint, because these are important points to remember. So here are the qualifying relationships under current law. There are parents. You can sponsor a parent if you're 21 or older. You can sponsor a spouse, but only one spouse at a time. I see here many of you have tried to have several spouses at a time. I'm here to tell you, you're not supposed to. Siblings, is the age 18?
Spouse is 18.
Yo, spouse and siblings?
Siblings
21. So siblings you can sponsor, but you have to be 21. And your children are always people you can sponsor, whether your children are single or married, no matter how old they are. Lawful permanent residents, so green card holders, they're limited to a much smaller group of people. Lawful permanent residents can only sponsor their spouses, again, one at a time, and their unmarried children. So you're really going to look out for that. Green card holders can only sponsor children who are unmarried. A word about unmarried. How do you get to be unmarried? I'll tell you. You may not know what that word means. You can be unmarried. The easiest way to be unmarried is never to get married. That's a good one. But you can be unmarried because you used to be married, now you're divorced. You used to be married, the marriage is annulled. You used to be married, your spouse died. So unmarried covers all situations where you're legally single. But again, it's a legal situation of being single, not like my deadbeat husband took off 12 years ago and I haven't seen him since. That does not make you legally single. And again, legally married, it's not because you hung out together for a long time. It's not because you have kids. And we don't have common law marriage in New York or most places in the United States. So you need a legal, valid marriage. You can't get married to someone for the purpose of getting a green card. That is not, or any other immigration benefit, that is not work for immigration purposes. And you can't be a bigamist, meaning having 2 spouses, or a polygamist, meaning having more than 2. And I wouldn't recommend it anyway. Okay. Who is a child? You probably all think you know what the word child means, but like so many words in immigration law, it has a really technical meaning, and the word child changes. It's used in a bunch of very specific ways, and it changes all the time. So sometimes it just means the parent-child relationship. So I, who am 29, as I have been now, I think for every call-in I've ever attended, my mother and father can say that I'm their child, even though I'm 29. Generally, in immigration, the most common cutoff age, depending on what the legal situation is 21. But sometimes it can be 14, sometimes it can be 16, sometimes it can be 18. There's some laws that, immigration laws that allow you to be treated as a child till 25. And then there's something called the Child Status Protection Act, which allows you to be considered a child for immigration purposes even beyond your 25th birthday. So you can't just say You can't just say, oh, this person is a child of, is going to qualify as a child because they're under 18, they're under 21. No, you have to be very, very careful, and the laws are really specific for a variety of different situations. Who's a sibling? Bottom line, you need to have one parent in common. You can have, in a lot of situations, though not all, you can have step siblings and you can have adopted siblings qualifying as siblings as well. So half sibling, step sibling, full sibling, adopted sibling. So this is the part I find trickiest to communicate, are the words immediate relatives and preference relatives. And again, this is a good slide to try to mark and say, this one I need to come back to and get my head around. Our immigration law turns families into, basically there are two flavors of family. There's the flavor called immediate relative and the flavor called preference relative. So they're distinct categories, immediate relative and preference relative. And just like the word child doesn't mean child as we use it in everyday language, the word immediate relative is not used in the same way that we use immediate relative in normal everyday English. Then the second kind of family, a preference relative family, this is like shows you the logic of immigration, if nothing else. No immigration law makes sense. If it makes sense to you, you probably haven't understood it. It's all confusing. So we have 5 categories of preference relative, and they are conveniently numbered 1, 2A, 2B, 3, and 4. Those are our 5 categories. Only the US government could come up with that. Who is an immediate relative? Again, not someone who you would call an immediate relative in standard, regular, everyday English. An immediate relative is very specific. It means the spouse of a United States citizen. It means the unmarried child under 21 of a US citizen, and it's under 21 in legal years, not real years, so there's not always a one-to-one correspondence, or the parents of US citizens who are 21 or over. So spouse of a USC, unmarried child under 21 of a USC, or parent of a USC who's 21 or over. Preference relatives, and this is another one. I memorized it a long time ago, but for those of you who haven't yet memorized, it's good to mark this page. Preference relatives. Preference category 1, unmarried children of U.S. citizens, unmarried sons or daughters of U.S. citizens who are 21 or over. Preference category 2A, spouse and unmarried child under 21 of a green card holder. Preference category 2B, unmarried child 21 or over of a green card holder. Preference category 3, married son or daughter of a United States citizen. And preference category 4, sibling of a U.S. citizen. So those are your 5 categories. Hard to memorize at first, but mark the page. Tip, turning 21. For anyone who wants an immigration benefit, turning 21 can be a critical cutoff point. Often a lot of things need to be completed before someone's 21st birthday. However, sometimes through various legal tricks, even somebody after 21 can benefit from laws that are essentially for people under 21. So when you're getting close to 21, just under, just over, you want to talk to, and you're getting questions around that, you want to make sure you raise your red paddle, your stop panel, and ask this person they're calling, they're 20 years old, they're 22 years old, they want to know, what happened to 21. It's very tricky, and there are a lot of different rules around it. So each being an immediate relative and being a preference relative, each of them have some benefits. Each of them have some nifty things that make it possible for those people to get some other benefit. An immediate relative gets some benefits that a preference relative doesn't get. A preference relative gets some benefits that an immediate relative doesn't get. So let's talk about the benefits of an immediate relative. So there are a couple. So number 1, as long as the immediate relative entered the United States lawfully, they had a visa, they came in to the United States lawfully, presented themselves at the border with the identification that corresponded to their own identity, then they're usually going to be able to get a green card in the United States. That's a huge benefit to being an immediate relative. And number 2, there is no waiting line for immediate relatives. So it is very common for people who are in the United States who have an immediate relative to file the green card application and the immediate relative petition together. It's not required, but it's commonly done because there is no waiting line for immediate relatives. I mentioned at the beginning about 1 million people a year get green cards, but if suddenly there were 20 million family members of US citizens applying for green cards, all of them would be eligible to file today. We have no quota, no cap, no limitations on immediate relatives applying for green cards. So as you heard earlier this morning, you can wait a decade, you can sometimes wait 2 decades until you get to the front of the line to apply for a green card if you're not an immediate relative, if you're a preference relative, but the immediate relative, no waiting line. So that is great. The contrast here is that preference relatives wait online. That's a big bummer, as I said, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And then, although there are some exceptions, some of which you're going to learn about, the sort of general rule, unless you fit within an exception, is that if you enter the U.S. unlawfully, you worked in the U.S. without permission, you lived here when you didn't have permission to be here, then you're not going to be eligible to get a green card in the United States. So you have to wait a long time, and then when you finally get to the front of the line for your preference category, it is very common, not always, there are some exceptions, but it's very common then that you're not eligible to apply for a green card here in the United States. There is one benefit to being a preference relative, a really big one, that makes it one thing that's better than being an immediate relative, which is preference relatives, unlike immediate relatives, can bring family members in with them at the same time. So if you are sponsoring an immediate relative, any of their close family members can't come and get green cards at the same time. With preference relatives, their close family members often can get green cards at the same time. This means that if they are in a category that allows for spouses, which are categories 3 and 4, you can be married and come in under 3 or 4. In those categories, you can bring your husband or wife with you when you get a green card. And for every single preference category, all 5 of them, you can bring your children in with you at the same time and get a green card. So that's a big benefit. So how does the system work? As you've probably heard, often it doesn't. We call it our broken immigration system. We have a lot of people here with close family members who aren't able to get green cards. But to the extent that it does work, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the procedures. So the first thing that you need to do is, if you are a citizen or green card holder, and you have a family member who's either an immediate relative or a preference relative, the first thing you need to do is file a form. It's called Form I-130. It's only 2 pages, but it costs a lot of money, a few $100s, that you have to pay the federal government. And you can use this form with both immediate relatives and preference relatives. The I-130, which is the form you use to show that you are a citizen or green card holder and you want your qualifying family member to also be able to get a green card, the form you use is I-130, and that doesn't matter if your family member is what we call an immediate relative or a preference relative, whether they're going to be applying for a green card in the U.S. or from outside the United States. Everyone starts with an I-130 if they're sponsoring a family member. And again, what you are establishing with the Form I-130, which is the key beginning document, you're establishing that you, the filer, are a citizen or green card holder, so you're going to need proof of that. And then you are establishing that you have a qualifying relationship with the person who you say is your family member. The most common documents you use to show that are marriage certificates, birth certificates. Sometimes you're required to use DNA when it's a blood relationship, and the documents may not sufficiently establish the relationship. The person who's going to be sponsored is called a beneficiary. The form can be found on the USCIS website. It costs $420, and it is filed by the citizen or green card holder, and it's filed on behalf of their family member who wants a green card. So you have a petitioner, the filer, and the beneficiary, the one who's going to get a green card eventually. So a few things that are important to know. is that once the I-130 is filed, a change in the petitioner's immigration status, a change in the beneficiary's age, or a change in the marital status can move somebody in and out of preference or immediate relative categories, if there's a category they can move into, or it can kill the I-130 altogether. So sometimes, let's say you're a green card holder, you file for your 20-year-old child who's under 21, 10 years later, you're a citizen, and your child is over 21, so your child would go from preference category 2A, preference category 1. And that petition is still live. If the I-130 petitioner dies, which, as you can imagine, if you're waiting over 20 years, sometimes people die, it happens. And so the beneficiary of the I-130, in some situations, is still going to be able to go forward with the green card application, but not in all situations. When a family member who files for you is also abusive and there's a domestic violence situation, there are often things that you can do as a domestic violence victim to file separately. So generally you need the sponsor to be around the person who files the I-130, but in some situations, the most common of which are your family member dies or there's a domestic violence situation, there are ways to go forward without them. Okay, next story. This is Madhu. What are you going to say to Madhu? Madhu, a long-term lawful permanent resident, meaning a green card holder, filed a family sponsorship petition for her son, Anil, several years ago. She is thrilled because she just learned that Anil's priority date, meaning the date that she filed, is current, which means that he's at the front of the line to be able to apply for a green card. She hopes that her son, who lives abroad, will be able to apply for and complete the green card process and enter the United States by the fall. You run into Madhu, and she shares this information with you along with a final piece of good news. Her son, Anil, is engaged to Archana, and his wedding is only 2 weeks away. So, what do you say? Mazel tov. I can't wait to meet Anil and Archana when they move to New York in the fall after completing their green card application process abroad, called consular processing. B, that sounds really great and all, but if Anil and Archana considered a commitment ceremony or just exchanging rings out of a Cracker Jack box or something like that, if the couple marries before Anil completes his green card application process, gets approved, and comes to the United States, your family sponsorship petition will be dead in the water. C, I think if Anil and Archana get married before Anil gets his green card, it will send him back in the waiting line. It will take longer for him to get to the front of the line for a green card. Or D, does Archana have a sister? I'm looking for a new girlfriend. So again, 30 seconds, vote. Okay. What do you say to Madhu? You say, that sounds great. Have you thought about a Cracker Jack exchange instead of a marriage? So about 44% of you thought that, I see one brave soul is just hoping for a new girlfriend. Another bit of advice, when you talk to callers, don't ask them for dating advice. Not a good thing. That's not what this event is for. So the largest group of you thought that this was going to set Anil back in the process. But remember, his mother, Anil's mother, Madhu, is a green card holder. There is no preference category, or there is no category for married children of green card holders. if Anil gets married before his process is completed, he gets his visa, and even if he gets married the day before he enters the US, that is it. No green card for him. So he cannot get married if he wants to come in on the I-130 petition. So the correct answer involves Cracker Jacks and ring and a commitment ceremony. It is B. C, again, he doesn't go farther back in the process. The process is dead. Okay. So how the system for immediate relatives works. So when a family member is you're a U.S. citizen and you have a family member who is called an immediate relative, as I said, you can file the I-130 and green card application together. If the United States citizen is already outside of the United States, if the person you want to sponsor is outside the United States or is going to need to go outside the United States to apply for a green card, you file the I-130, a standalone I-130. And then some people just do it because of money. The green card application is over $1,000. Some people don't have it, so they'll file the I-130 first, and then down the road they'll file the green card application. The I-130, at the time I wrote this PowerPoint, the I-130 waiting time in the Northeast was about 5 months to get a decision. When I looked most recently, it's actually now 6 months. So it's going to take about 6 months if you file a standalone I-130 to get it back. The date that immigration receives your I-130, the date they get it in the mail, is going to be called the priority date. So when a preference relative who can't file the I-130 with a green card application because their family member is going to go online, files the I-130, they get a placeholder online, and their placeholder is the date that the application is received by the mailroom at immigration. And no immigration center takes in-person filings. There's nowhere you can go to file in person. You have to do it by mail. So they all go through. There's an address you mail to. You can overnight it. You can send it first-class mail. And when they receive it, that's going to be your place online, called the priority date. When you get to the front of the line, it is known as being current. That's the immigration expression for you are at the front of the line. It is your turn to apply for a green card. And I want to say your turn to apply for. When you get to the front of the line, nobody mails you a green card automatically. It only means that you're at the front of the line and you can apply for a green card. But again, even when you're at the front of the line and you have the chance to apply for a green card, it might end up getting denied for one of the reasons that I've talked about and some of the reasons that I haven't. So one thing that we're going to try to do in, 10 minutes or less, 15 minutes or less, is try to see what is, how do you read a priority date, and how do you find out what date is at the front of the line. Neither of those things are that easy, but we're going to try to walk through it. A couple things to say before we talk about how to look it up is nobody knows how fast or slow the line is going to move. The U.S. government has a quota for how many people in the preference categories are allowed to move to the U.S., but you just don't know if people in front of you are going to be interested. So let's say everyone decides that they don't want to move to the United States. The list starts moving much faster because people in front of you online don't want to move here. Again, they get to the front of the line, they don't apply, so the spaces move faster. So we don't know if it's going to move. Then it can be an unexpected number of people get to the front of the line and do want to apply for green cards. And lines can freeze for months at a time or go backwards. So we're going to understand, we're going to try to understand how you figure this out. So people might call and say to you they have a form I-797. I get that all the time. I'm looking into I-797. I would say about 90% of the mail that comes from immigration is on a piece of paper that says Form I-797. That it says that somewhere doesn't tell me much. That's like, oh, immigration wrote you a letter. But what is important is that in the section that's going to be called Notice Type or Preference Classification, it's going to say whether you're dealing with an immediate relative or a preference relative, so it'll be right on there. You'll see that it's an I-130, and you'll see a section called priority date. So those are the words you're going to be looking for. and I have an example here. So as you see here up on top, it says I-797, and like I said, almost all mail I get from immigration says that on top. Doesn't really mean anything. That's just sort of like immigration stationery and not very pretty. Case type, this is an I-130. So when I look at this piece of paper, or if I'm talking to someone on the phone, I'm like, what does it say under case type? What kind of case do you have? It says I-130. So then I know that that person I'm talking to on the phone has filed an I-130. What is their place online? We see here receive date, which is the same as a priority date. There is listing of a priority date, April 24th, 2011. I know that that person's priority date, their place online, April 24th, 2011. And then what kind of case is it? It says sibling of a USC. So I know that sibling of a USC is preference category 4. And somewhere buried in there, under 203A4, is the number 4. That's what tells me it's preference category 4 or sibling of a USC. So I see this, and I know that this person, that the person who filed it is a United States citizen, and they filed for a brother or sister who is not a U.S. citizen or green card holder, and the priority date is April 24th, 2011. Here's another receipt. They don't always look identical, but here is another one. Here is another I-130 where the priority date is February 19th, 2012. This is actually not a receipt. This is an approval notice. So I know the case has been approved, and it's for a parent of a U.S. citizen. So let's look. So let's go back. So the priority date here, preference category 4, the priority date April 24th, 2011. And let's look here. April 24th, 2011. Anyone, this is not a poll question, but do you think the person is going to be eligible to apply for a green card? How do we know? Are they eligible or not? There's a line for family sponsorship, F4. 4 is fourth preference category, sibling category. And it says that how long you're going to wait online, as you might gather from this chart, depends on what country the beneficiary is from, because we also have caps on how many people can move to the United States from each country. So for most countries, if your sibling was born, if the receipt was received before November 22nd, 2001, then in April, it's their turn to apply for a green card. But if your family member is from Mexico or your family member is from the Philippines, the line is even longer. Do people have visa bulletins in their packet? Okay, thanks. So pull out your visa bulletin and let's talk about this case study. Can Jean-Jacques apply for a green card right now? Jean-Jacques was born in Paris on July 14th, 1981. He is a citizen of France. He is single and has never married. In the year 2000, his father, Claude Francois, moved to the United States and became a green card holder and remains a green card holder. Claude Francois filed an I-130 for Jean-Jacques, which was received by USCIS on December 30th, 2006. So the question is, can Jean-Jacques apply for a green card now? Your poll is open. What? It looks like it's open. People are able to... Okay, you have a couple more seconds. It's on. Okay, let's stop and see how you did. So we have a majority of people who think that that he can apply for a green card. Fewer people think he can't, and one person chose C. I just want to say there was no C option. The answer is, can Jean-Jacques apply for a green card? No. No? Preference category 1 is, that's a mistake, I wonder how it got there. Actually, the correct answer is yes. I don't know how we got the wrong answer there. Mark that off. So the majority of you got the correct answer. The chargeability is February 22nd, 2007. I mean, the date is February 22nd, 2007. Oh, I'm sorry. Can he apply for, oh, yes was A. B, no. Oh, you are so right. It is correct. I take it back. This is for me for not paying enough attention. So, I'm going to go back and explain to you the mistake I just made, and I'm going to do that right now. I forgot that Jean-Jacques was a green card holder. Or Claude Francois, whatever. Claude Francois was a green card holder. If the father was a U.S. citizen, his single child would be eligible to apply for a green card today. If the father were a U.S. citizen and had filed before February 22nd, 2007, his child would be eligible to apply for a green card today. However, my bad, I didn't read my own question, the child, as the child of a green card holder, a child of a green card holder is preference category 2B. Preference category 2B, the priority date is October 22nd, 2006. So there's the difference. Son of a green card holder, priority date is not current because it's October 2006. Son of a citizen, if his father were a citizen, it would be his turn to apply. Okay. You can all start throwing tomatoes at me. That was not good. Okay. Let's have a chance to try another one. Hopefully I'll get the answer right. Case study. Who, if anyone, can apply for a green card right now? Andrew is a U.S. citizen. He was born on February 3rd, 1965. He filed an I-130 for his sister Karen. Karen is a citizen of the Philippines. The I-130 filed for his sister was received by USCIS on September 5th, 1990. In 1990, sometime, who remembers when, Karen married Robert. And on April 1st, 1995, Karen gave birth to the couple's son, Matthew. Note that Robert and Matthew, like Karen, are citizens of the Philippines, the only country where any of them have ever lived. So, poll question. Who, if anyone, can apply for a green card now? So you can start voting. The answers are A, Karen can now apply for a green card, but Robert and Matthew cannot. B, Karen and Matthew can now apply for green cards, but Robert cannot. C, Karen and Robert can apply for green cards, but Matthew cannot. D, none of these people can apply for green cards. E, all three family members can apply for green cards. Okay. Here we go. A, B, C, D, E. We have a nice distribution there. And the answer is E. Yay! Everyone can apply for a green card right now. And I want to just briefly explain to you why that is. Karen is preference category 4. When preference category 4, when they get to the front of the line, whoever is married to them, whatever children they have at the time that they get to the front of the line, gets to apply for a green card at the same time. Doesn't matter if they were married or divorced or married to someone else at the time the I-130 was filed. Doesn't matter if they had kids, they didn't have kids at the time. You look at the date when you're at the front of the line, whether or not you can apply for a green card. And so since Karen is at the front of the line, she can include her husband can apply for a green card and her child, as long as her child is unmarried and under 21. And with that, wrong answer and all, I made it in time. So thank you very much.
Great presentation, Julie. We're going to be handing out the index cards for your questions, so be on the lookout for that. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. She will be talking about adjustment of status. Allison Baker. She's a staff attorney with the Legal Aid Society's Immigration Law Unit.
Hey, before we start, I just want to thank everyone for coming today, and also I just want to thank CUNY Citizenship Now for inviting me to present this morning. So thanks to everybody. Before I start the slides, I just wanted to point out to you what section of the manual we're using, because as the speakers this morning spoke about, the manual is a really important resource. So it's manual section 3 is everything I'm going to be talking about. I think most of what Julie also spoke about was from section 3 of the manual. Okay, and so that starts right around page 45 of your manual. So please use your manual as a resource. There's a lot of information in there, even more than what I'll be talking about is contained in the manual. So my presentation today is very complicated. There are a lot of waivers and exceptions to what I'll be talking about. So it's not an easy area of the law, even for those of us who do this every day. It's very complicated. So when you do get questions that pertain to adjustment of status, I'm sure you'll be relying heavily on the supervisors in the room, the attorneys and the accredited representatives that are there. So please do so. Use your, like Alan said this morning, use your placards, your stop signs, raise them up, because this is very complicated. And even after we speak this morning, we don't expect you in any way to be experts on this topic. Okay, so the goal really is issue spotting. Okay, just so spot the issues, use the manual, section 3, and then hold up your question signs, and don't feel badly to do so. That's why we're here. Okay. So for the rest of the morning, it's going to kind of piggyback off of what Julie started, and we're just going to also talk about adjustment of status in other contexts. Okay, so Julie talked about the family-based system, which is by far the most popular way to obtain residency, but there are other ways. There are other pathways to residency. So I'm going to talk about those this morning, and then also hurdles. And Julie touched on some of them. There are obstacles and hurdles, which are technically called like grounds of inadmissibility, that pertain to anyone getting their residency. There are certain waivers in certain categories, but it's still something that has to be looked at for every type of adjustment applicant. And just so you know, when I say green card holder, that's sort of the slang term for permanent resident, so that's the same thing. And LPR, also that's just lawful permanent resident. They're all the same thing. LPR, resident, green card holder, same status. Okay, so this is just a general overview of the different types of immigration status: U.S. citizen, permanent resident. There are humanitarian categories, which includes refugees and asylees, but there are others. There are non-immigrants, people who are here for a limited time or a limited purpose. And then there's the undocumented population. The presentation this morning is going to largely focus on the permanent resident, right? Because we're talking about how do you become a permanent resident, what are your pathways to do so, and what are the obstacles in front of you, okay? So that's going to be our focus. Okay, so this is just the most recent version of the permanent resident card. It's been some years since they changed it to this type of card. They even made it sort of green, which goes with the name, right? So there you go. Okay, and this is just the applicable law. So it's the Immigration and Naturalization Act. the Code of Federal Regulations, there's an adjudicator manual, and various court decisions. So what are the eligibility requirements for adjustment of status? And Julie touched on some of these, but we're going to go over them. This is a list, and then in the coming slides, we're going to look at them each more in depth and kind of define them. So the first of all, I just want to define adjustment of status. It's kind of a technical term that we've been using all morning, but what does it mean, right? So adjustment of status just means getting your green card while you're in the United States. It's just the legal term for doing so. You're adjusting your status. You're getting your green card while you remain in the US. If you get your green card while you're outside of the US, it's called consular processing. Okay, so it's the same process. You're getting your green card either way, right? It's just different terms. So just so you know, we're focusing on adjustment of status today. We're just means we're focusing on getting your green card from inside the United States. So first you have to be inspected and admitted or paroled. So what that means is you have to have a lawful entry. And in the next slide, we're going to talk about the different ways that you can do that, but that's one of the requirements. You must be eligible to adjust your status, which in the family-based context that Julie talked about would be having that petitioner with a visa immediately available to you, though there are other contexts that we're going to talk about. You have to be admissible, and this is where it gets kind of technical because there are grounds of inadmissibility that are considerations for everybody applying. I'm going to go through some of the more popular ones in a few minutes. Again, you have to have an immigrant visa available to you or fit into one of the special categories, and we'll talk about who they are in a few minutes. And then also, it's just discretionary. Okay, so even if you meet all of the criteria, you have the lawful admission, you have the petitioner, you're eligible for your status, you have everything, there's still an element of discretion. Okay, so it's still up to the individual adjudicator to make that decision and weigh any positive or negative equities. Okay, so what does it mean to have a lawful admission? How do you have that? Okay, so there's some kind of obvious ways and some not so obvious. So if you enter the US with a visa that was issued to you, so the most popular type of entry visa would be the tourist or the visitor visa. So let's say you go to the US consulate in your home country, you get a visitor visa in your name, issued to you rightfully, you enter the US. At the airport, you'll typically get what's called an I-94 card, though I think they're not giving them out the way they used to anymore, but you'll get a stamp in your passport for sure, you'll have your visa, and you may have this little white index card indicating that you entered legally. That is definitely a lawful admission, okay? So that would be the easiest example. However, if you were admitted using false documents, so the example I would give is say you're from Ecuador and you try to get a tourist visa. You go to the US consulate, you ask for one, for whatever reason they deny you, okay? But your cousin, who's also from Honduras, for whatever reason, he looks a lot like you, you're the same age, or close to it, and he's able to get a tourist visa. And so you use his passport and you take it and you enter the US in someone else's name. So that is considered a lawful entry, okay, but you did commit a fraud, so you may need a special waiver. But just for the purpose of entry, it's considered an admission for entry, okay? You can also be paroled into the United States. If you're paroled in, that's considered a lawful admission too. So some example would be people who are paroled into the United States for medical reasons, or it could be for humanitarian reasons. Perhaps there was a natural disaster in your country and you were allowed to enter the United States as a parolee. If you're paroled in, that's considered a lawful admission. And also, if you enter into the US through the normal course of business, so for example, if say you're a Canadian and you make in the 90s you made a border entry by car into the United States, and at that time the normal process was you just showed your Canadian passport or your Canadian driver's license and you were waived in, and that was what they did then, that's all that they did, and that was the normal course of business, then that can be considered a lawful entry or admission as well. And that's a little bit technical and can be hard to prove, but it would be considered a lawful admission. Okay, so what are these grounds of inadmissibility? Okay, I'm not going to go through all of them, okay, because there's a number of them, but I'm going to kind of hit the highlights. And so these are things that are stumbling blocks or hurdles to obtaining permanent residency. And just to point out, for certain types of people obtaining their residency, there may be waivers or ways to get around these things, but there's something that you have to think about for all applicants. And the first is public charge. Okay, so if immigration believes that the intending immigrant or the beneficiary will become dependent on public assistance as their main source of income, if they're approved, then they can be considered a public charge. Now, fortunately, most people can get around this with something called the affidavit of support, and that's where the petitioner, so the U.S. citizen or resident family member, puts in their taxes and signs a form showing they have enough money to meet the guidelines to show that you won't become dependent on public assistance as your main source of income. You could also use what's called a joint sponsor. So if the petitioner doesn't have that income, you can use another person who meets the criteria. There are health grounds of inadmissibility. So if you have certain communicable diseases of public health significance, and they're listed in the regulations, which ones they're talking about, you're inadmissible. Okay, so some examples would be tuberculosis and SARS. There are others in the regulations. And again, there is a waiver available if you can show you're in treatment, you have letters from your doctor saying you've been educated about the spread of the disease, you're complying with your treatment program. But it's still something else you have to do. It's like it's a hurdle. And just to point out, HIV is no longer included in that list of communicable diseases of public health significance. It was until, I think it was 2010, and then it was removed from the list. So that's no longer, having HIV will no longer trigger a ground of inadmissibility. So the next one is kind of the big one, and it kind of goes to what Julie was talking about in the family context earlier. So immigration violations or illegal entry. This is the biggest hurdle by far that I find for my clients. So often when I meet new clients, one of the first things I ask them after I get their basic information is, well, how did you get to the United States? How did you get here? Because the answer to that question is going to dictate the rest of our conversation and really can sometimes very much limit their options as far as adjustment of status goes. So the main thing, and Julie talked about earlier in the family context, whether you entered with a lawful admission, with a visa, say, issued to you, makes a big difference. Okay, so you're going to have a lot more options if you came lawfully. So you entered with a visa that was issued to you, but you say you overstayed. Well, if you're an immediate relative, which Julie defined for you earlier, that'll be forgiven, and you can just proceed and you can adjust your status if you're an immediate relative. But if you're a preference relative, no. You would need a special exception, or otherwise you're not eligible. So you can see that some people can actually come on lawful visas and violate and still have an option to adjust their status in the family context if they're an immediate relative. Okay? There's no such exception for preference relatives except for one little waiver we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Now, if you entered without a visa, no lawful entry, that's called entering without inspection, which immigration calls EWI, like EWI, okay? Then it doesn't matter. Even if you're immediate relative, preference relative, in the family context, you cannot adjust your status in the United States, okay? And there's only going to be one little exception, which I'll define in a few minutes. So this is a huge problem, right? So this is often a stumbling block for people trying to benefit from the family-based system. And so the perfect example is we see people at the outreach that I do all the time who come and say, married to a US citizen, 3 US citizen kids, been here for 20 years, always working, paying their taxes, never arrested, never had any problems with the police, perfect, member of their church, all sorts of wonderful things they're doing. And then I ask them, how did they enter the United States? And they say they entered EWI without any inspection, without any permission. And then I say, well, you're not eligible. So as I'm sure you could tell, those are the people that are really very upset by that fact. And it's a huge hardship for people. And so the illegal entry and the immigration violation is a really important ground of inadmissibility. Of course, criminal convictions can make you inadmissible. I'm not going to talk in depth about which ones, because that's like a whole 2 or 3 day training just for that one bullet point. But for your purposes, if it does come up in conversation with a caller, please hold up your stop sign, question marks, have one of the supervisors come over. It will often be that those people are going to have to be referred to an immigration specialist because it's a very tricky area of the law, and we're going to need to see documentation regarding their any criminal history that they might have. We're going to need to see certificates of disposition to make sure we know exactly what their situation is. And so it's something that's definitely beyond the scope of what we can provide information to callers about. But if it does come up, please, if it comes up in the adjustment context that a caller talks about any sort of criminal history or arrest, raise your question mark, okay? So have somebody come over for sure. And then, of course, there's a terrorist ground of inadmissibility. If immigration thinks you are involved in terrorist activity or plan to do so, you would be inadmissible to the United States. Okay. I'm going to touch upon unlawful presence and what that means and how that can be a problem. Because keep in mind, adjustment of status takes place in the United States. So as I said earlier, if you hit say you entered illegally and you hit the illegal entry bar to adjusting status, immigration might say, okay, you can't adjust your status, meaning you can't get your green card in the United States, but go ahead, you can consular process. You can go to your home country and you'll still have your relatives, so you could go there and you can process there. And so there's another area dealing with unlawful presence and how that can still be a complication on doing that. It's not as easy as it sounds. So if you've been in the United States, either your time has expired or you violated your visa, you're accruing what's called unlawful presence, so unlawful time. Okay, so say you come on a visitor visa, you're given 6 months to remain in the United States, okay, and then the 6 months elapse, and now it's 6 months and 1 day, your unlawful presence clock has started ticking, and you're starting to accrue unlawful time in the United States. At the point that you then exit the United States after having unlawful presence, you trigger a bar, and this is referred to as the 3 and 10 year bars. What that means is if you've been in the US for more than 6 months but less than 1 year illegally, you have a 3-year bar that you trigger upon exit. If you've been in the US more than 1 year illegally, you trigger a 10-year bar. So you can see how that is a huge obstacle for people to just say, okay, go back to your home consulate and you can just process there. Well, no, because you're going to hit this bar and then you're going to have to deal with that. Now, one thing just to point out is, and this is kind of hyper-technical, but if you left the US pursuant to advance parole or permission, if immigration gave you permission when you exited in the past, there's some case law that says that you're not actually triggering the bar, and so there's some wiggle room for people who did that. Also, you don't actually accrue any unlawful time until you're 18. So if you're a minor and you're out of status, that clock doesn't start ticking against you until you're 18 years old. There's also a limited waiver, which I'm not going to talk about too much this morning, but there's something called a stateside or provisional waiver that can waive unlawful presence for certain relatives of certain beneficiaries who have an immediate relative petitioner. Okay, and it's sort of a new thing, but for certain people, if you meet all certain criteria and you have a certain immediate relative petitioner and you can show hardship to certain family members, you can get a waiver of this bar before you leave, so that when you trigger it, you already have the assurance that it's waived. Okay, so just to go over quickly ineligibility for adjustment of status and what non-citizens are restricted and may have some waivers available and what non-citizens are ineligible. Okay, so restricted non-citizens would be people who entered in transit without a visa. So say they were just changing planes at the airport, right? And then they just didn't get on that second plane, so they kind of came in transit. They're a crew member. Okay, crew members are going to be restricted, so they were working on, say, a cruise ship and then left that cruise ship and stayed in the US. If you've not been admitted or paroled, you're going to be restricted from getting your adjustment of status. You worked without authorization. You're not in lawful status. You were admitted under the visa waiver program. And the visa waiver program is for certain countries that we have an agreement with where US citizens can travel there without a visa and their nationals can travel here without a visa. The most popular are like Western European countries. Or you violated your terms of admission. So all of those non-citizens will be restricted. They may have options if they fit into certain waiver categories, but they're going to have hurdles. Okay. And then there are ineligible non-citizens. So if you're not a beneficiary of an approved I-130, you don't have any petitioner, and you don't fit into any special category, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, then you don't really have any means to adjust your status, right? So you're not going to be eligible. If you were admitted as a conditional resident, and we're going to define that in a slide in a few minutes, you would be ineligible to adjust if you were admitted as a conditional resident. And also, if you entered as a K1 or a K3, so a K1 is for a fiance of a U.S. citizen and a K3 stepchild of a U.S. citizen, okay? You have to marry upon 90 days of entry and process through that petitioner, the person who got you the K1, the fiance visa. If you didn't do that, you're going to be ineligible for adjustment otherwise. And so this just drives home the point of what Julie talked about this morning, right? Even if you have a certain petitioner in the family-based context, there are all these other considerations. And so it's not just enough to say, my father's a U.S. citizen, my spouse is a U.S. citizen, my child over 21 is a U.S. citizen, so that's it, I'm fine. No, there's all these other considerations. Okay, so you heard me say earlier that there's a certain kind of, it's not really a waiver, but another provision by which people can adjust their status. I mean, not to bore you with the terms as far as the sections of the law, but most people are going to adjust their status through what's called Section 245A of the Immigration and Nationality Act. But certain people can adjust under what's called Section 245I. And so I'm just going to talk about what that means and who can benefit from that, okay? So I said earlier, in the family-based context and also in the employment-based context, if you entered without any permission, okay, you had an illegal entry, you're basically not going to be able to adjust your status. Well, this is the one thing that can cure that. You're kind of curing your EWE entry if you fit into what's called 245I. So what it means is if you had anyone do a petition for you before April 30th of 2001, you may be eligible for 245I, okay? So say, for example, you were married back in the 90s to a U.S. citizen, and that person did an I-130 for you, and you have the receipt, and it's dated 1995, let's say. For whatever reason, you didn't get your green card through that process. Let's say the marriage broke up before the green card was approved and didn't go through, but you do have that receipt for that I-130 that was filed, and it was legitimate. You were really in that marriage. It was a truthful marriage, but it just didn't work out, right? Well, that means you had something filed for you before April 30th, 2001. And you might be able to actually adjust your status now, even though you entered the U.S. illegally. So say now you're married again, right, to another U.S. citizen, truthful marriage. You can show immigration that you had this old petition back before April 30th, 2001. Hopefully you have the receipt for it, some documentation showing that you had it. And they'll actually let you adjust your status in the U.S. even though you had that illegal entry. Now, there's a super fine, which we'll talk about later, and they fine you above all the other fees you're already paying, but they'll still consider you grandfathered in and let you move forward. And so basically this is applicable to the family context, or even if you had a labor certification from a former employer. So a former employer started the petitioning process, and you had a labor certification, okay, that was filed before April 30th, 2001. That can also allow for 245I eligibility. So for the people that it helps, it's a huge benefit. But as you can imagine, as we move farther and farther away from April 30th, 2001, there are less and less people who are going to fit into 245I, right? Because they're just not going to have anyone that did anything for them before April 30th, 2001. But when I meet new clients who entered illegally, I always ask, did anyone file anything for you ever? Can you remember anyone ever, ever, ever? Because there's this possibility, right? So you want to know. And sometimes people have all their documentation. That's great. Sometimes they don't. They say, I know I had something, but I don't have any proof of that. And I know we're not going to talk about it during this training, but there's a Freedom of Information Act process by which immigrants can get a copy of their file. And so that's really helpful when people think that something was filed for them, but they don't have documentation of it, because it may be in the file, and we can request it and see if we can find something. So just a little bit more on 245I. Initially, it was for people with receipts for applications filed between October 1994 to January 1998. It was then extended beyond January 1998 to, as I said, April 30th, 2001. However, if you're basing your 245I eligibility on a petition filed between 98 and 2001, you have to show that you were here in the US on April 21st, 2000. You have to be physically present in the United States. Okay, so hopefully, I mean, they don't expect you to have like a receipt from that day. If you do, that's wonderful. But if you have other things from around the year 2000, maybe you have medical records, school transcripts, maybe even a tax return for that year, that's going to be great. So the prior application just had to be properly filed and approvable. Obviously, it can't be fraudulent. It can't be something that was never going to be approved because it was just a sham. That's not going to make you eligible. And the benefits can extend to derivatives. So if you were a minor child and your mom had 245I, you can benefit from that. And as I said, there's a super fine or a fee of $1,000 just for 245I eligibility, and you still have to pay all your other fees related to adjustment. Okay, so we have our first case study. I'm going to read it first, and then I'm going to open up the time for you to participate. So the case study, the question is, will Alicia be able to adjust her status in the United States? Alicia overstays her tourist visa, which expired April 1st, 2011. She now has her adjustment of status appointment based on a family-based application her resident or green card holder husband filed for her 4 years ago. And the options are, A, well, can Alicia adjust her status? A, no, because she overstayed her time, doesn't qualify for 245I. Yes, she should have no problem. C, she'll be barred for 10 years because she has more than 1 year unlawful presence. And D, yes, she may adjust because she didn't leave the US and trigger a bar. Okay, so I'm going to start the polling. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds, okay? So okay, I'm going to stop the polling, so get your last minute. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to show the polling results. Okay, so most of you said D, right? Okay, well, D's not the right answer, but most of you said D. The answer is actually A. So she won't be eligible because she overstayed her time, okay? She overstayed her time, and there's nothing in the question that would make you think she qualifies for 245I. So keep in mind, Alicia's a preference relative because her husband is a resident, okay? So violating a visa is not automatically forgiven for preference relatives. And maybe I'll forgive you on that one because I'm not sure I drove that point home earlier. But if you're a preference relative and you violate your visa by overstaying, which is the case here, you can't adjust your status unless you have 245I. And in this example, there's no reason for us to think she had 245I because the husband just did the petition, you know, fairly recently. Okay, so let me just, so there you go. So A, she will not be eligible for adjustment of status, and what that means is getting her green card in the United States based on this petition because she overstayed her time and she's a preference relative and she doesn't have 245I. As far as we can tell, there's nothing in the example that would make us think that. If she did, if for some reason she did, maybe she'd have an option there. Okay. Okay, so we're going to go forward and we're going to talk about other avenues to adjust your status. All morning we've been talking family-based, right? And so there's good reason for that because that's the way that the majority of residents get their green card. So it's important for us to spend a lot of time on that. But I just want to go spend some time this morning on the other ways to adjust your status because there are other avenues to residency. They're listed here and then we're going to take them through in a little bit more detail as we go through the slides. But there's an employment-based component to our immigration process. Okay, some people do obtain their residency through employment-based petitions. There are certain people who are self-petitioners, and there are different categories of who they are. But you'll see as like a common theme that often the worst situation someone is in personally or personal hardships that they have can sometimes give them more options with immigration. Okay, and for the most part, many of the self-petitioners are allowed to be self-petitioners because of a hardship in their lives. There's something called the diversity lottery for nationals of certain countries. there's registry, and then there are humanitarian entrants. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on the family-based system and the step 1, step 2, because that's really the majority of what Julie talked about this morning. But just again, that it's, for most people, it's a 2-step process, filing the I-130, which Julie talked about in detail. The second part, which is what we've been talking about more, is the form I-485. And the I-485 is just the adjustment of status application. That's just what you're using. Okay, so your I-130 is approved, or you're putting it together in the same package with your 485. And the I-485 is where immigration looks at the beneficiary. So you've already established you have your qualifying relationship, you have all that, and now immigration with the 485 is looking at the intending immigrant. Are there any grounds of inadmissibility? How did you enter the US? Let's see a copy of your visa. Do you have any criminal convictions? So the I-485 and the adjustment process is focused on the intending immigrant, okay? Julie talked about this in detail. There's immediate relatives, and then there are preference relatives, and the benefits of being in each category. The big ones, the 2 big benefits for immediate relatives is timing. Okay, you get to do step 1 and 2 together. You don't have that long wait pursuant to the visa bulletin. So that's a huge benefit for immediate relatives. And then, as I said earlier, immediate relatives, if you violate a visa that was lawfully issued to you, you can still process in the United States. Okay, whereas that's not true for preference relatives. Julie took you through how to read the visa bulletin, so I'm not going to go through it, but just to point out that this dictates your place online. People always say, how do I know I'm in a preference category? How do I know where I am on the line? Well, you need to look at the visa bulletin and see about how much longer you have. Now, it's not an exact science because the visa bulletin doesn't move in real time. Okay, so it's not like every month these dates are going to move up 1 month. That doesn't happen. They could jump a few months at a time. They could stay still. They can occasionally move backwards. So it's hard to tell people exactly how much longer they have, but it can give you a frame of reference. Okay, the next case study. I'm going to read it first, and then we'll open up the poll. So, can Jessica adjust her status? Jessica came to the United States on a student visa. Last year, she married John, a lawful permanent resident, who filed for her status on I-130. The application was filed 2 months ago and was just approved this week, which would be very uncommon because it usually takes them longer, but that's the premise of the question. They're very fast, apparently, in this case study. So can Jessica adjust her status? A is yes, she may file for adjustment of status because she entered legally. B is yes, she may file for adjustment of status because she's now married to an LPR. No, because she has to wait for John to naturalize. And D is no, because she has to wait for the visa category to be current. Okay, here we go. All right, start your voting, polling. Okay. Okay. So looks like most of you were correct this time. So the answer is D. No, she has to wait for her category to be current. Keep in mind, Jessica in this example is married to an LPR, right? So she's subject to the visa bulletin. So she has to look at the visa bulletin. If her I-130 was just filed 2 months ago, it's not going to be current. Okay. The one thing I just want to point out is that she entered on a student visa, okay, so she had a legal entry. So she entered with, it's called F1, so it's a valid visa issued to her. So she doesn't have to worry, right? She entered on a valid visa, and also student visas are like for durational status. So assuming she's still in school or immigration didn't terminate her student visa, she still would be in status, and so she wouldn't have to worry about any 245I or anything like that. Okay. Okay, we talked about the difference between adjustment of status and consular processing, but I just want to talk for a few seconds about the agency structure and how they interact depending on which route you're going. So adjustment of status takes place all in the United States, right? And so you're only dealing with USCIS. okay, because they're going to adjudicate the application. So it's one agency, which, you know, even though there are many problems with it, don't get me wrong, at least you're dealing with one agency, okay? Consular processing is a whole different thing. It starts out with USCIS with adjudication of the I-130. Then after that's approved, it goes to the National Visa Center. After the National Visa Center collects the fees and documents, it goes to the Department of State, because that's the consulates work under the Department of State. And then when the intending immigrant comes to the United States, they're actually then encountering a fourth agency because they're presenting their documents to Customs and Border Protection. So you have a whole bunch of different agencies, and, you know, hopefully they're communicating correctly. Conditional residents are people who I talked about earlier, but basically most people who get their residency are going to have their green card is going to be valid for 10 years. If you see anyone whose card is valid for 2 years, that means that they obtained their residency through a marriage that was less than 2 years at the time of approval, so a fairly new marriage. Okay, so kind of as a double check on immigration fraud, immigration will just issue a card valid for 2 years instead of the 10, because at the end of that 2-year period, they want you to do another application with your spouse to lift that condition and get the 10-year card. But for all intents and purposes, they're a permanent residence just like anyone else. They just have to do that lifting of the condition. In a perfect marriage where everyone's still happy and together, you'll do that lifting of conditions together, where you file a joint filing, okay? But as we know, stuff can happen during the first 2 years of marriage that makes it impossible for you to do that together. If that happens, there are certain waivers that the applicant can apply for. If they're divorced, but they can show that they married in good faith, they can do that waiver. If their spouse has died, they can proceed without their spouse. If they're a victim of domestic violence, they can ask for a waiver based on the abuse and cruelty. And if there's extraordinary circumstances that they can show that warrant the lifting of the conditions, even though they don't meet any of the other criteria, they can try to get the extraordinary circumstances waiver. I just want to point out that stepchildren will also get the conditional residency. So if the residency of the child is based on the marriage that was less than 2 years, the children are also going to have 2-year cards because it's still, their residency was still based on a new marriage. And immigration wants to check on that. I talked earlier a little bit about the fiancé visa, but it's the K-1. If you enter on a K-1, you have to marry within 90 days of entry. The K-1 is for fiancés of US citizens only. It's not for fiancés of residents, only citizens. You have to marry within the 90 days to that same petitioner, okay, the same person that got you the K-1, and then file for your adjustment, okay? So that's just one restriction for people who are in that limited category. I'm not going to talk too much about the employment-based process other than to say it is a component of our immigration system where the employer takes the place of the family member. So instead of having the family member petition for you, you have the employer petition for you. They file what's called a labor certification, and then the form I-140. And then again, the beneficiary still has to file the 485 and deal with all the grounds of inadmissibility that might come up. Okay, we have another case study, but I feel like since we're a little bit low on time, I might just run. We're okay on time? Okay, so we're going to run through it then. So is Marco eligible to file for adjustment of status? Marco Frontero paid someone to guide him across the desert in 1990. He managed to evade Border Patrol and has not left the United States since his initial entry. He worked for a small resort hotel for over a decade and then filed an application for labor certification in 1997. It was approved, and an immigrant visa petition was filed in 1999. He filed for adjustment of status under the other worker category when his priority date was current. However, because of misfortune with the business and decline in the company, they could no longer afford to pay the offered wage, and so he never obtained his green card through that process. However, he's now married, and his wife, Anna, is a lawful permanent resident, and she filed a petition for him in June 2009, and his priority is now current through his petition from Anna, his permanent resident wife. So the question is, can he adjust his status? Okay, so A is yes, B is yes, but only after Anna becomes a citizen. C is yes with proof of the labor certification from 1997, and D is yes with proof of the approved immigrant visa petition. And I'm going to open up polling, okay? since most of you voted, I'm going to close polling. Okay, so most of you said C, which is correct, right? And this goes back to the 245I eligibility. So with that old labor certification, okay, from 1997, Marco will be able to show that he can adjust through 245I because he had that old labor certification from 1997. So that's the important document. It's more important than the filing of the actual I-140. It's the labor certification that's really important. So hopefully Marco has proof of that. If not, there's actually a FOIA process through the Department of Labor, which maybe you can find proof of it, but hopefully he has it, and then he can proceed with his adjustment through Anna, even though she's a permanent resident and he came without any permission, okay? Okay, so again, C, yes, with proof of the labor certification. Okay, I talked about earlier how there are certain people who are self-petitioners, and so these are people who don't need the family member and they don't need the employer. They can just proceed with their adjustment of status on their own, and it's often due to hardship. Okay, so the first is the widow or widower of a U.S. citizen. So if you were married to a U.S. citizen, say you thought that person was going to petition for you, unfortunately they pass away, you can continue on as a self-petitioner. You just need to file within 2 years of the death of your spouse. Okay, so you can continue with the process. Now that's only for widow or widowers of U.S. citizens only. Okay. Then there's the Violence Against Women Act, and just to point out, the word women is in the title, but applies equally to men and women. And this is for spouses, children, and parents of abusive U.S. citizen or residents. Okay, so you can kind of see the idea behind this, that if you're in a domestic violence situation, often your immigration status is used as a component of that violence, where the petitioner, the abusive spouse, will say, oh, I won't petition for you unless you stay with me, or I won't go to that interview we have coming up, or I'll call immigration on you. So this is a way for people in that situation to essentially petition for themselves because they've been a victim of extreme cruelty or battery. Okay, so they're a form of a self-petitioner. The next is Special Immigrant Juvenile Status, or SIJ, and this is for undocumented children. So by child, it's unmarried and under 21, who can show they've been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents. Okay, so it's for undocumented youth, some of who will be in long-term foster care, and others who may just be living with grandma or aunt, uncle, or cousin, but they're not with their parents, and they can get a finding of abuse, abandonment, or neglect. It has to be filed before they turn 21 or they age out of that process, okay, but it's a huge benefit for undocumented youth. And I just want to point out for VAWA and SIJ and some of the other special categories, your entry into the United States is waived. So that's a huge benefit, right? So you don't want to say, like, it's a huge benefit that you were a victim of domestic violence, or it was a huge benefit that your parents abandoned you. But if you happen to be in that situation and you entered illegally, you're going to have an option that you wouldn't normally have under the standard family-based process. Refugee and asylum, as far as adjustment of status goes, basically if you hold refugee or asylum status for 1 year in the US, you can adjust on your own. So in a way, you're a form of self-petitioner, okay? Because you don't need the family member or the employer. And the difference in the name is just where you obtained your status. If you obtained your status outside the US, you're called a refugee. If you obtained your status inside the US, you're called an asylee. But other than that, you're waiting. When it comes to adjustment of status, the important point is that you just wait the 1 year and you can file for your adjustment status on your own. And a lot of the grounds of inadmissibility are waived for refugees and asylees. Okay, so they have some waivers available to them that the family-based system does not. Cuban adjustment, so Cubans kind of have a special category onto themselves. So no matter how you arrived in the United States, if you're Cuban, you can adjust your status after 1 year. So you can either have come on a visitor visa, overstayed, you came by boat with no permission whatsoever. No matter how you came, after 1 year you can adjust your status. Okay? Of course, some of the criminal grounds of inadmissibility will apply to you, so hopefully you don't have anything to disqualify you. But the point is, you don't need the family member or the petitioner or the employer. You're just Cuban and you're here for 1 year. Registry is kind of interesting, doesn't come up too much, But basically, if you've entered the US before January 1st, 1972, and you lived in the US continuously and you never left, and you can prove that, then you can actually apply for your residency alone without any petitioner through the registry process. Now, immigration wants primary evidence of your physical presence in the United States. So you can imagine how much documentation you have to have from 1972 to now showing that you never left, okay? And ideally, it's something every 90 days you'd have at least one document for of primary evidence. So it's very hard, but it does happen, and we do see it. Some people keep everything, right? So it's just an option for people. It doesn't come up too much, and you want to have a strong case if you're going to file it, because if it's denied, there's a good chance that the person will be brought into immigration court. So you don't want to file it unless you feel you have a strong case, or maybe the person's already in court and it's their only option, so you might as well try it, right? Just a quick note on the fees. Immigration charges for everything, and so especially when it comes to adjustment of status, the fees are very high. So the I-485 is $1,070. That's just the flat fee just for that part. And again, this doesn't include what Julie talked about this morning with the I-130, that $420, that's separate, okay? If you're 79 or older, it's $985. If you're under 14 and filing with a parent, it's $685. But again, there's additional fees associated with the I-130 and all of that. So, and then if you need the 245I, that's another $1,000 on top of that, right? If you're in the special categories that we talked about, there's often fee waivers, and you don't have to pay the adjustment fees if you can show you meet the income requirements for a fee waiver. But for the family-based system, you're pretty much going to be paying the fees. Okay? So just one last case study about the fees. What fees does Marco have to pay for his I-485 application to be properly filed? So we're going to go back to Marco, who we just talked about before, who entered through the desert without permission. He entered without inspection in 1990. He's now seeking adjustment of status based on the petition that his wife, Anna, is filing, right? And he's using that proof, the 245I, from the old employer. So he's doing the 485 with his wife, and he's doing the special 245I based on the old employment. So what are his fees? So A, none. He's ineligible to apply. B, $1,070. C, $1,000. D, $2,070, a combination of B and C. Or E, $685. I'm going to open up the polling. Okay. I'm closing the polling. So the results, 70% of you are correct. D, so it's 2,070, okay, because he needs the 1,070 for the 485, and then he needs the additional $1,000 to process under 245I, so those two together, 2,070 just for the adjustment of status. So it's very, very costly. Okay, so it's D, 2,070, a combination of B and C. Okay, so we're done. I think we're moving on.
Those are both wonderful presentations. Yeah, another round of applause. So we're going to move into our morning Q&A session. So if you haven't already done so, please pass the questions only on the morning topics, which is family-based immigration and adjustment of status, to our staff to collect. And Julie and Allison, we can have you come up. So we'll alternate from mic to mic. ready for our first question? Is it on? Okay, we have one, on this side. No. Do you want to?
I think so. Yeah, this one works.
So I don't have to scream.
There we go.
If I used the fee waiver when I applied for citizenship, will my relative be considered a public charge if I try to sponsor them?
No. That was an easy answer. No.
Can I sponsor more than one family member at a time, like brothers and sisters?
Yes. All your family members who qualify.
Okay, in the context of same-sex marriages and adjustment of status, if the petitioning spouse is a USC or LPR, do the same immigration rules apply to this couple?
Yes. So everything we talked about applies equally, whether it's same-sex marriage or not. Everything is the same, and that's because last summer the Defense of Marriage Act, I'm sure you all heard of it. So everything is just equal.
Okay. A beneficiary in a preference category has a child. By the time the priority date is current, the child is over 21. Can the child still immigrate with the beneficiary?
That is a tricky one, and I'm going to tell you why. As I said, 21 is, for many immigration benefits, a really important cutoff date. So for not all benefits, but for a lot of them, 21 is the key number, and that includes coming in as a child under a preference category. However, there are legal tricks to pretend like, where someone can be pretend under 21. It's kind of similar to how I'm pretend 29, but it's a little bit different. It's something, it's called the Child Status Protection Act, which we have, there are whole books on it, but they're complicated formulas you can use. So what you want to do if you get that question is flag down a supervisor with your red stop sign. You should have brought them for show and tell. And they can help you walk through how to answer that question, but it's a little bit tricky.
Are we ready for the next? Go ahead.
If someone crossed the Canadian border with a valid documentation, but was not inspected by CBP, how can they prove they legally entered the country?
Yeah, so it's a little tricky, but again, if that was the normal course of business at the time that you entered, that was just a wave-through process. First off, historically, that was just the process, and so that'll be kind of known. I mean, then I would definitely prepare affidavits, right? So an affidavit from the applicant about how they entered. Were they on a bus? Were they in a car? If they were in a car with someone, maybe also affidavits from the driver of the car or someone else in the car about what happened. If they were in a bus, maybe they have their old tickets, whatever. You want to back it up with something, but if it was an entry in the normal course of entry at the time, it should be considered a lawful entry. But I will admit it's hard.
And so I just want to talk about this word inspection. It's one of those words that has kind of different meanings in law and regular life. But inspection generally means in immigration that you showed up at the regular place where you were supposed to cross. You weren't sneaking when no one was looking in the middle of the night, but you showed up at a regular place and waited online or whatever the process was and crossed because there were officials there who let you cross. So whether you actually stop and talk to someone and show them documents, or whether you're in a car and they just wave it through, you are considered inspected, meaning you went through the lawful show up, present yourself. If they chat with you, they don't chat with you. Both situations you're inspected, which is an important idea for immigration.
I just want to put in my 2 cents there. I practiced at the border for several years, and we were also able to use, in addition to affidavits, credit card statements to show at that point of time if they stopped at duty free and they stopped for something to get something to eat after the fact. That was helpful.
Okay, this question has 3 parts. Somebody who obtains a green card through marriage and then divorces and remarries the second spouse, can they sponsor that second spouse right away?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by right away.
Right.
I mean, listen, if they were a full resident, like it wasn't conditional, they had their 10-year card, and they remarry, and then they became a citizen, and then they remarried, is the whole idea?
I don't know if they're a citizen
Oh, okay.
right now. I think the question said the first year they divorce,
Right, I
marries a
understand.
second spouse.
But you have to keep in mind, often people divorce like many years after they've been separated. I mean, it happens all the time with our clients who just don't have access to divorce. So maybe, they could have been separated from their original spouse for 10 years, but they just got divorced, right? So they could have been in this other relationship with this other person for a long time. Unless there's something else suspicious, I mean,
What I want to say about marriage, because I see it a lot, is if you got your green card through marriage, you tend to get, when you're presenting for another immigration benefit, whether it's citizenship, whether it's sponsoring another family member, there's just this huge suspicion about marriage that immigration has. You can't choose who your parents are, your kids are, your siblings are, and that can often, if it's a blood relationship, be verified through DNA. But you can kind of sign up to marry anyone, and it's not per se clear what your intentions are. So if you get your green card through marriage and you're legally divorced, the very next day you can legally marry somebody else and file a petition for them. There's no bar per se on filing on fighting for another person. However, your next spouse, they're going to look long and hard at your first marriage to figure out if you were lying when you got a green card.
It's fine.
Okay, for sibling I-130 petition, how do you prove someone is your sibling if the parent you have in common, your father, is dead?
well, I would assume that if his name is on both of your birth certificates, that would go a long way. So, I mean, you just need to have one parent in common, and his name appears on both, and it was legitimated, there was no issues with legitimacy since it's your father, then that should be fine. He doesn't have to be, alive.
And I'll note there are countries that are not really birth certificate oriented, and so people sometimes don't have birth certificates, and there are ways, regulations allow for separate ways to establish that relationship. And today, the most common way that USCIS verifies blood relationships from countries that aren't big on documents is through DNA tests.
Someone who received DACA, deferred action, and has a U.S. citizen father, can they adjust status?
So yeah, it totally depends. DACA doesn't give you any special ability to adjust your status. You still have to fulfill all the obligations that I talked about during the presentation. It depends on your entry, depends on your age, it depends on your marital status. It depends on a lot of different things. So simply having the DACA would make you any more eligible.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who got DACA, which is great, they get work permits, they get social security numbers, and people feel like a lot of the doors that were closed to them by immigration law are now open. And in one sense, that's true. You can work lawfully, you can get a social security number, you can travel anywhere within the United States without worrying about getting picked up by immigration. But it doesn't mean that your underlying ability to get a green card has really changed.
Next question.
We have a Twitter question. What are the rules for same-sex couples? Do they enjoy the same rights as opposite-sex couples?
Yes, same rights.
And I think we have time for one more question.
Sure. Is somebody enter under a visa waiver, under the visa waiver program, will they be able to adjust status?
I believe it's only through immediate relatives, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Adjust status to their immediate
Right, they can only adjust through immediate relatives. Okay, so
Not
not preference.
Okay, I lied. We have one more question we can do.
This just pertains to I-130 filings. If the petitioner, the difference between the petitioner, if the petitioner is a U.S. citizen or an LPR, who has to fill out separate I-130s?
There's a person who is filing for a family member. If you are a citizen or a green card holder, no matter who you are, if you're a citizen or green card holder, those are really the two options. You are the one who files an I-130. So there's no difference between the form that is filed. It is always the person who's a citizen or green card holder, they're the filer, and the form is the I-130. And that's a form for all family sponsorship.
Okay, one quick one.
This is a quick one. Somebody applies for a spouse within 2 years of marriage, but it takes 3 years from the marriage for the spouse to enter and get their green card. Will they get a 2-year conditional green card or the 10-year one?
It's from the date that it's approved, right?
It depends. The technical point is the day that you are made a lawful permanent resident. So in the United States, if you're all physically here, and the day that the system shows you're a lawful permanent resident, which tends to be usually the date or the date after your green card interview here in the country, then that's the date that matters for counting for 2 years. It's trickier if you're outside the United States, because if you start out outside the United States, the process is that you get an interview. That's not the date you become a green card holder. When you're approved, you get a visa in your passport. That is not the date you become a green card holder. The date you become a green card holder is the day you first hit the United States, an airport or a land crossing. So if you got your visa, let's say 1 year and 11 months after your marriage date, but you don't physically enter the U.S. until 2 years and 1 day after your marriage date, you get a 10-year card.
Okay, so that concludes our morning Q&A. Thank you again to our wonderful presenters.
1 second, hold on 1 second.
And tomorrow's got some.
Can we just have another round of applause for our presenters and our moderator? And a round of applause for you guys for such great questions. So we're going to be back in this room at 1:15. Please take your iClickers with you. Unless you're leaving for the day, then please turn them in at the registration table. Hang on to them. We're going to need them in the afternoon session. We're going to proceed to the student dining hall for lunch, which is on the second floor. So you're going to see our staff at the escalators and the elevators, and they will direct you to the student dining area. And we'll see everybody back here at 1:15. Thank you.
How are you?